Chapter 2408. Yanqing's gaze was as cold as a blade as he glanced at Umo. Umo immediately took a step back, fearing that the man in front of him would draw his sword. Hehe, I'm just concerned about you. Yanqing turned around and walked away, not bothering with him. Umo chased after him, unwilling to give up. Hey, say something. What's going on? Are you guys really together? Why didn't I know about it before? We're brothers after all. Why did you hide it from me so tightly? Yanqing stopped in his tracks and looked at him coldly. Noisy. So noisy. Umo was hit hard. He covered his heart with one hand and was extremely sad. You heartless person. If it were someone else, I wouldn't even bother to ask. You wait. He suddenly realized that something was wrong and widened his eyes. You mean it's true? This kid didn't deny it. Yanqing frowned slightly. He pursed his thin lips and was about to leave. Umo was so shocked that he froze on the spot. Damn. Little Hachi is so beautiful. Why is her eyesight so bad? Umo's voice stopped abruptly. He looked down at the scabbard on his neck and forced a smile. He stretched out his fingers and carefully pushed it away. That cough, I was just joking. Didn't he just say something from the bottom of his heart? Did he have to be like this? What's more, this was the truth. Cough, tell me, what does little Hachi see in you? Umo looked at him from head to toe and clicked his tongue. There are so many people chasing little Hachi. What does she see in you? Your facial paralysis? Yanqing's gaze was so cold that it could kill. Umo raised his hands. I'm telling you, I'm here to protect my master. If you kill me, all these things will fall on your head. Yanqing kept his sword. Umo leaned forward and asked in a low voice. But speaking of which, does little Hachi know your identity? Yanqing's expression froze. Umo snorted. I knew she wouldn't know. Now even the master's identity had not been revealed, so how could they? I think little Hachi has a short temper. You'd better be careful not to lie to her. Otherwise, in the future. Yanqing frowned. She has a good temper. Umo staggered and almost fell to the ground. What did you say? This brat. Had he forgotten how little Hachi had chased after him and made trouble for him? Although Umo wasn't familiar with little Hachi, he had heard a lot of rumors about her. That was a powerful person who would slap the 8th divine emissary in the face if he didn't agree with him. How could such a person have anything to do with the words very good temper? Yanqing didn't even look at Umo as she left. Umo. He seemed to have been despised just now. Time passed. In the room, the game between Chu Liyue and Rong Xiu had just begun. Chu Liyue's palms were sweaty. Now every time she placed a piece, it would consume a lot of her energy and strength. Therefore her speed was very slow. Compared to the calm and composed Rong Xiu, she was in a difficult situation. Now, she could basically confirm that the black divine power in Rong Xiu's body was not weaker than the golden divine power he had always shown to the outside world. In fact, it was even stronger and more unpredictable. You've let me win so many times in the past. You're really patient, Chu Liyue snorted. Rong Xiu's lips curved into a faint smile. I've always been like this to you. And his patience wasn't just limited to this. He didn't say the rest of the sentence. Chu Liyue rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She originally thought that this game could be over quickly. She could hold down Rong Xiu and get to the bottom of it. But now, it seemed that it would take a lot of time. At this moment, a loud sound suddenly came from outside. Boom! Chu Liyue was shocked and immediately looked up. A silver tianlei quickly streaked across the sky. Chu Liyue was stunned. The lightning pool had been sealed. Logically speaking, it shouldn't boom. Boom! Boom! As if a door had suddenly opened, several tianlei streaks came one after another. It was late at night, and the sky was dark. The appearance of these tianlei instantly lit up the entire courtyard. It was dazzling. Most importantly, they were all heading in the same direction. Chu Liyue was stunned for a moment, then quickly realized that it was the direction of Taizu. Was he refining a weapon? And this movement seemed a little different from before. It was more like Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. Taizu was trying to refine a divine artifact. Then where did these tianlei come from? Soon Chu Liyue found the answer. These tianlei didn't come from the lightning pool, but, sister, are these enough? It was Aunt Twelve's voice. Chu Luyue and Rongxiu sat by the window. They could see the situation in the courtyard when they turned their heads. Aunt 12 was standing in the courtyard, holding a broken longsword in her hand. Beside her stood Aunt 11. Unlike her, Aunt 11 held a long spear in her hand. But at this time, it was also in pieces. Aunt 11 rubbed it and threw it away. It's not enough. Senior Tang Ke said before that divine artifacts are different from ordinary emperor and venerable artifacts. The amount of Tianlei needed is very shocking. This is nothing. Aunt 11 nodded obediently. Oh. She rolled the broken sword in her hand into a ball and gently placed it beside her feet. Then she took out a saber. Crack. That heavy and majestic saber instantly broke into two halves. Aunt 12 waved her hand, and several silver Tianlei gushed out and went straight ahead. Chapter 2409. Chu Luyue was speechless. After so many years, why do these two girls seem a little different from the others? If I'm not mistaken, that saber is a venerable artifact, right? And I've never seen it before. At this moment, a voice full of praise sounded. Not bad, not bad. Aunt 12 has improved a lot this time. Chu Luyue turned her gaze and saw Tang Ke standing not far away from the two of them with his hands behind his back. He was looking at the two of them with a gratified and appreciative expression. The quality of these venerable artifacts can only be considered average. You two can practice first. I'll find you a few better ones later. Shang Guanjing wanted to forge a sacred artifact. The further he progressed, the higher the need for Tianlei's power. However, he had to prepare early. Once he broke through, he would officially step into the realm of a refining saint. For this day, Tang Ke had made sufficient preparations. He could not screw up at the most critical moment. When Aunt 12 heard the praise, her small face immediately blushed and she nodded vigorously. Okay. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. She felt more energetic. Aunt 11 did not say anything, but her hands did not stop moving. Rays of Tianlei flew out from those divine artifacts, almost illuminating the courtyard as if it was daytime. Tang Ke touched his chin. What's the big deal about the lightning pool being sealed? There are always more solutions than difficulties. Chu Luyue was speechless. Although she had been looking forward to seeing Taizu break through, the current situation seemed to be different from what she had expected. Such a big movement naturally attracted the attention of others. Mu Hongyu's face was filled with amazement. So it can be like this. It's really amazing. Jian Fengqi said faintly. That's right. This young master has a part to play in these heavenly lightning. Mu Hongyu glanced at him. If you can really help Senior Shang Guanjing break through to become a refining saint, you'll benefit from it. TSK, you're really greedy. Jian Fengqi was speechless. Although these words made sense, why did it sound a little wrong? Mu Hongyu looked at Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 again. In the past, I only heard that they have big appetites. I didn't expect that they were actually waiting here. The astonishing energy was completely absorbed by the two of them, fusing into every inch of their bodies. As a result, they could now dismantle divine weapons with their bare hands. Even Her Eminence wouldn't be able to do it so smoothly, right? Speaking of which, the people around Luyu are quite powerful. God Beast Mountain, Yu Qian and Hua Shuangshuang were facing each other from a distance. More and more mythological beasts stood out and surrounded Hua Shuangshuang, forming a confrontation with the Yu Qian. The Yu Qian was extremely angry. Just as he was about to attack, he suddenly heard a voice. Wait! Yu Qian frowned and turned around. When he saw who it was, a trace of astonishment flashed across his face. Patriarch Mao Zhen? Mao Zhen walked over with a smile. Second Oracle, you're finally here. Waiting for me? After all, the other party was the patriarch of the Great Phoenix Dragon Clan. Yu Qian's attitude was still considered polite. Patriarch Mao Zhen, are you looking for me? Of course. I wanted to have a good chat with you some time ago, but you didn't leave the illusory god palace, so I waited until now. Mao Zhen spoke as if he had just seen Hua Shuangshuang. Oh, there's someone else here? His eyes swept across the mythological beasts around Hua Shuangshuang, and finally looked at Hua Shuangshuang with a deep gaze. Hua Shuangshuang cupped her fists and bowed. Greetings, Patriarch Mao Zhen. Mao Zhen waved his hand and smiled at the Yu Qian. Second oracle, I wonder if it's convenient for us to talk? Yu Qian frowned quickly. After thinking for a moment, he nodded. Patriarch Mao Zhen, please. As he spoke, he stared at Hua Shuang. He couldn't touch him today, but there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Mao Zhen didn't seem to notice the subtle atmosphere between the two. Second oracle, please. Then, Yu Qian and Mao Zhen left together, leaving only Hua Shuang and the other mythological beasts. After the threat disappeared, Hua Shuang exhaled softly. But for some reason, there was still a breath in his chest. It was uncomfortable and couldn't go up or down. Ow! The little wind-stepping tiger shouted in his arms. Hua Shuang looked down and saw that the little thing was still trembling. It was obvious that it was still scared, but it still ran out without hesitation. And the surrounding mythological beasts, if it were someone else, they would be very happy and proud to have so many mythological beasts protecting them. But now, Hua Shuang's heart was particularly heavy. When he saw the tragic death of the wind-stepping tiger last time, he knew that the second oracle in charge of the mythological beast mountain, Yu Qian, was not an easy person to deal with. Now that he saw it, it was indeed so. In his eyes, these mythological beasts were just objects that could be dealt with at will. He didn't care about them at all. Other than the wind-stepping tiger, there were many other mythological beasts that had similar or even worse situations. Hua Shuang took a deep breath. Thank you for this time. You can all go back. As he spoke, he raised his arm, and the golden-winged raven-boned beast flew to his arm. He lifted his foot and left. Only a few reluctant gazes fell on him and wrapped around him. Hua Shuang walked for a distance and stopped again. He lowered his head and looked at the dumpling tongue hanging on his waist. Peach Blossom Cove. Yu Jiu was standing guard in front of the gate realm, playing with the wooden sword in his hand. It seemed that this one couldn't be used anymore. He had to get a new one. But fortunately, his big brother left him a few before he left. Suddenly, a distant sound of a zither came from the gate realm in front of him. Yu Jiu was shocked and immediately looked up. He saw a figure faintly visible in the dazzling mirror embedded in the gate realm. Digression, it was so hot today. Chapter 24:10. It was the figure of a woman. The light was blurry, and he could only vaguely make out a rough outline. Yu Jiu's heart skipped a beat. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the wooden sword in his hand and stared at it. Ever since this mirror appeared in the gate realm, this was the first time something like this had happened. He stared at the figure without blinking, trying to figure it out. Unfortunately, the scene was too vague, and he couldn't tell what it was. A faint pressure gradually spread out, and it even made Yu Jiu feel a deep sense of reverence in his heart. This is, however, in just a moment, the figure gradually dissipated. The dazzling light on the mirror shrouded over again, covering everything. It was as if everything was normal. However, Yu Jiu couldn't relax. He had never felt such a shocking pressure before. How could there be such a figure in the mirror? And who was that person? Yu Jiu was a little uneasy. However, for a long time, that scene didn't appear again. After a long time, he finally exhaled softly and looked back. On the horizon, a silver bridge stretched across the sky. It was quiet, majestic, and sacred. More and more Tianlei gathered. Sheng Guanjing stood in the air. In front of him, there was a saber floating quietly. It was a long saber made of dark green copper. The blade was about 3 fingers wide and 1 finger thick. There was a groove on the back of the saber. At this moment, countless silver Tianlei came one after another and poured into the long saber in his hand. Sparks flew everywhere, and thunder rumbled. Sheng Guanjing held his breath and stared at the long saber in front of him with full concentration, afraid that there would be a mistake. Originally, he thought that with the lightning pool sealed, there was no hope for this breakthrough. He didn't expect Ant 11 and Ant 12 to come and help. Also, there was Tang Ke. With so many external forces helping him, if he still couldn't succeed this time, then he really wouldn't have the face to face everyone. Everything had been going smoothly before. Now there was only the most crucial point left, which was to summon the power of a chaos holy jade and pour it into it to refine into a saint. This step was easy to say, but it was extremely difficult to actually carry out. There were definitely many venerables in the illusion god palace. However, after so many years, there were very few who succeeded. Therefore, Shang Guanjing was extremely nervous. He raised his eyes and looked at the illusory god palace that stood at the end of the horizon. Success or failure, it all depended on this. Then he held the saber with both hands and poured the god power in his body into it. Chi. A glowing light suddenly flew out of the palace of illusory god, piercing through the dark sky and heading straight for Shang Guanjing. It's almost done. Seeing this scene, Tang Ke waved her fist, unable to hide her excitement. He was a weapon refining saint, so he was naturally the clearest about this. This time, Shang Guanjing would definitely become a saint. The commotion attracted the attention of countless people. Swish, swish. The sound of air being torn apart could be heard. Many people appeared one after another. They raised their heads and focused their gazes, following that streak of lustrous light. Someone is refining a sacred artifact. This movement doesn't come from the illusory god palace. Looks like someone is about to break through to the weapon refining saint realm. Wait, that direction, why does it look like? As the gate of heaven closed, everyone was in a state of extreme nervousness. Now that there was such a huge commotion, it naturally caused an uproar among the crowd. At this time, even the slightest movement would attract a lot of attention, let alone something as big as breaking through to the weapon refining saint realm. For a moment, countless people looked at Shang Guanjing following that streak of lustrous light. Soon some sharp-eyed people recognized him. Isn't that Shang Guanjing? The one who came up with Shang Guanyu. He doesn't seem to have a bloodline totem. Why is he breaking through to the weapon refining saint realm now? I heard that previously in the Divine Ruins world, he was an extremely top weapon refining master. That's not right. Isn't the lightning pool already sealed? Where did those Tianlei come from? Shang Guanjing's breakthrough made many people envious and shocked. Even the origin of these heavenly lightning bolts made them extremely curious and confused. Aunt 11 looked up and put away the divine artifact in her hand. It should be enough. Sister, is it enough? Aunt 12 asked uncertainly. Aunt 11 nodded affirmatively. Tang Ke also nodded in agreement. The number of Tianlei is enough. Now it's up to him. Since it had progressed to this step, there was no need to worry about the rest. Oh, okay. Aunt 12 obediently put away the items. She seemed to have sensed something and looked up. At this moment, the streak of lustrous light broke through the air and landed on the long saber in front of Shang Guanjing. Boom! A loud noise was heard, and a powerful energy wave spread out in all directions. The streak of lustrous light instantly enveloped the saber. An indescribable aura began to surge out from it. Tang Ke was relieved. Shang Guanjing's talent in weapon refining was indeed very amazing. His guidance during this period of time was not in vain. Now finally, what's that? A soft voice suddenly came from the side. Tang Ke turned and saw Aunt 12 looking up in a daze. She was the one who asked the question just now. Aunt 12, what are you asking? Tang Ke saw that her expression was a little strange, and could not help but ask. He liked these two girls very much, so he was extra patient. 12th Madam pointed upwards and whispered, "That light." Tang Ke was stunned and then explained, "Oh, that's an aura from the Chaos Holy Jade. If you want to refine a holy weapon, you must have this thing." Aunt 12 nodded in realization, but her eyes were still fixed on the sky. No one knew what she was thinking. Then, she gently tugged at Aunt 11's sleeve. Aunt 11 looked back. The two of them looked at each other. Without needing to say anything, they already knew what each other was thinking. They really wanted to go over and take a look. Aunt 11 was more mature. After thinking carefully, she said, "It's not convenient now." "I'm afraid it's not convenient now. I'll think of something later." Aunt 12 nodded obediently. "I'll listen to you." The two of them spoke very softly. Most of Tang Ke's attention was on Shang Guanjing, so he did not hear them clearly. Boom! A shocking aura descended upon the place. Shang Guanjing officially stepped into the realm of a weapon-refining saint. Chu Liyue's eyes flashed slightly. She knew that Taizu would succeed, but she did not expect it to be under such circumstances. It was really not easy. It's your turn." A low and gentle voice came. She retracted her gaze and looked at the chessboard between the two of them again. Light surged on her fingertips. Without hesitation, she placed another piece. This time, she displayed an even more tyrannical strength than before. Pa! On the chessboard, waves of waves surged. However, it was only a moment before Rongxiu followed suit. A black chess piece fell next to her chess piece. All the waves were quietly annihilated. Chapter 24:11. Chu Luihua pressed her forehead. It was the same thing again. Every move she made was actually stronger than the previous one. But it didn't affect Rongxiu at all. No matter how much power she displayed, he was able to quickly catch up and easily devour all of the energy waves she stirred up. This was an all-around suppression. Chu Luihua had never felt like this before. It seemed that no matter what she did, she couldn't bridge the gap between the two of them. She had long known that the man in front of her had been hiding his strength intentionally or unintentionally, so she didn't dare to relax or neglect him. But now, Rongxiu saw that she didn't move for a long time and raised his eyebrows. Why? Don't you want to play? I'm destined to lose, Chu Luihua said softly. Not only would she lose, but she would lose miserably. Even if the two of them had just started, she could already see the ending. Rongxiu looked at her quietly. The bright light outside the window shone on her face through the window. Her skin was like jade, and her eyes were like stars. She lowered her eyes slightly, and her thick and curly eyelashes fluttered slightly. After a while, she chuckled softly. Even if I lose, I have to be clear about it. Besides, she wouldn't admit defeat until the end. Rongxiu's lips curved up into a smile. He already knew her answer and choice, so he was never worried that she would choose to give up in the middle. This was her. Chu Luihua took a deep breath. Continue. Swish. Shang Guanjing held the long saber in his hand and made a light slash. The void in front of him was instantly cut open. His eyes lit up. A divine artifact was indeed extraordinary. He sorted out his emotions and flew down under the gazes of countless people around him. Senior Tang Ku, thank you. He came to Tang Ku and the others, cupped his fists and thanked them solemnly. If it weren't for Tang Ku's help, he didn't know when he could take this step. Tang Ku waved her hand with a smile. Why are you being so polite? You were able to break through to become a refining saint mainly because of yourself. Otherwise, with so many refining venerables, it wasn't that they didn't know how to succeed, but it was still very rare. The guidance and help of others only played a supporting role. In the end, the most important thing was still the person. Even without him, Shang Guanjing would be able to break through to become a refining saint sooner or later. If you really want to thank someone, you should thank these two girls. Tang Ku laughed and said, if they hadn't helped you gather so many heavenly thunders, there would have been no other way. Shang Guanjing also laughed and said seriously to the two girls, Aunt 11, Aunt 12, it's all thanks to you. 12 blushed and waved her hand. No, this was Masters Taizu. They were already very happy that they could do something to help. 11 said, this is what we should do. You don't have to be so polite. If you need the heavenly lightning in the future, just let me know. Over the years, the two of them had accumulated a lot of divine artifacts, and Tang Ku's inventory was also very shocking, so there was no need to worry even if the lightning pool was sealed. Shang Guanjing laughed and suddenly thought of something. It was indeed luck that I was able to succeed this time. However, I don't know how long the lightning pool will be sealed. As long as the lightning pool was not sealed, the refiners in the illusory god palace would be restricted for one day. This was really troublesome. As he spoke, he turned his gaze and looked somewhere. You and Rongxiu haven't come out yet? This game of chess seemed to have been going on for a long time, right? Tang Ku followed his gaze and narrowed her eyes. I think we'll have to wait for a while. Shang Guanjing thought for a moment and said, then I'll wait for you or here first, and we'll enter the illusory god palace together later. Tang Ku wanted to say something but stopped. On the other side, Yu Qian and Mao Zhan had just walked out of the Divine Beast Mountain. As soon as they came out, they saw Tianlei flashing in the sky in the distance. The two paused in unison. Yu Qian narrowed his eyes and quickly realized what had happened. He frowned slightly. Someone has broken through to the refining saint realm. It seems to be Shangguanjing, Mao Zhen added. He was quite familiar with Shangguanjing, so although he was still quite a distance away, he quickly guessed the answer. Shangguanjing. Wasn't that Chuliu's Taizu? Yu Qian knew this name, but he had never cared about it before. He didn't expect that he had successfully stepped into the refining saint realm. Yu Qian's face darkened. Chu Luiyue wasn't enough, and now there were so many more people. Qi Han, Mu Hongyu, and Su Li, who had already entered the illusory god palace at the beginning. Now, Shangguanjing had also become one. Would there be others who would continue to follow? Yu Qian felt uncomfortable when he thought of that scene. If it weren't for Dumpling and the music score, he wouldn't have taken Chu Luiyue seriously at all. But now, he realized that the woman whom no one paid any attention to was breaking their expectations step by step, and doing things that were beyond their imaginations. I really underestimated her. Mao Zhen raised his eyebrows slightly. Of course, he could hear the Yu Qian's disgust for Chu Luiyue. Yu Qian looked at him. Patriarch Mao Zhen, why are you looking for me this time? Mao Zhen was about to speak when a woman's voice suddenly sounded. Second Divine Envoy. The two of them looked in the direction of the voice. Yu Qian frowned. Xu Jing, why are you here? He was in charge of this divine beast mountain, and the other divine envoys wouldn't come here under normal circumstances. Xu Jing was, Second Divine Envoy, I have something important to. Xu Jing was halfway through his words when he saw Mao Zhen next to him. He couldn't help but pause. Yu Qian frowned. Chapter 24:12. Mao Zhen said that he had something to discuss with him, and Xu Jing actually followed him. How could it be such a coincidence that everything happened at the same time? Then who should he listen to first? Xu Jing glanced at Mao Zhen and said softly, Second Divine Envoy, it's about the Herb Mountain. Yu Qian's heart skipped a beat. Mao Zhen's gaze wandered back and forth between the two of them for a moment, before he laughed. Second Divine Envoy seems to be very busy, so I'll make a long story short. I want to make a trip to Fengming Mountain, and I would like to ask for your permission. Yu Qian's expression was slightly cold, and he rejected without any hesitation. Patriarch Mao Zhen, I'm afraid that's not appropriate. Oh. Mao Zhen didn't seem surprised by his answer, and his expression didn't change. Second Divine Envoy, you don't have to think too much. I'm only going there to pay my respects to my ancestors. I don't have any other intentions. Yu Qian's pupils constricted, and his gaze was sharp and cold as he looked at Mao Zhen. Mao Zhen smiled, but there was no smile in his eyes. My ancestors have been dead for 10,000 years, but they have never been able to sleep. As a junior, it's really hard to feel at ease. Although it's for the illusory god palace and the divine master, it's not too much for me to want to pay my respects to them, right? Although he was smiling, his expression wasn't gentle, and there was even a hint of sharpness. Yu Qian stared at him for a long time before he raised his hand and threw out a jade pendant. Patriarch Mao Zhen, for Mao Yu's sake, I've always been polite to you. I hope you understand what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Mao Zhen held the jade pendant in his hand and looked at it for a while before smiling. Of course. After saying that, he nodded slightly at Xu Jing. I've said what I wanted to say, so I won't disturb the two divine envoys any longer. Then, he left without any reluctance, and his figure quickly disappeared from their sight. Xu Jing frowned. Second Divine Envoy, Mao Zhen is the patriarch of the Great Phoenix Dragon race. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to let him go to Fengming Mountain just like that, right? What if he wouldn't dare. Yu Qian's tone was firm. He didn't seem to want to talk about this and changed the topic. You mentioned a herb mountain just now. What's going on? Xu Jing took a deep breath and briefly recounted what had happened. Seeing that Yu Qian's expression was getting uglier and uglier, Xu Jing's voice became softer and softer. She felt guilty, but she also knew that there was nothing she could do. Relying on herself, it was indeed impossible to solve the problem of the herb mountain. Xu Jing knows that he is incompetent and has failed to live up to the expectations entrusted to him by the higher-ups. However, the heavenly gate was about to close, and there was not much time left. Xu Jing was worried that something would happen if this dragged on. So, I have no choice but to ask for your help. Xu Jing is willing to bear any punishment. I only hope that you and the first oracle will consider it carefully. Don't wait until things are out of control before you deal with it. At that time it will be really troublesome. Yu Qian was indeed very angry with Xu Jing, but her words were not without reason. This was a matter of great importance. Although they were angry, they could not really stay out of it. Yu Qian was silent for a long time. Then he said coldly, "You didn't look for the first oracle about this matter?" Xu Jing looked hesitant. "I have already begged the first oracle several times before, but he refused to even meet me once, let alone this matter." In desperation, she could only turn to Yu Qian for help. Yu Qian suddenly laughed. His voice was emotionless. "If you can't solve it, then this matter should be handed over to the first oracle. After all, I am only the second oracle. There are many things that I can't intervene in." Xu Jing was a little confused. Wasn't the second oracle in charge of the illusory god palace all these years when the first oracle was in seclusion? Why was he suddenly shirking his responsibilities now? What was going on? Xu Jing had known Yu Qian for a long time. She knew very well that Yu Qian would definitely be happy to solve these matters. But his attitude now, was it because the first oracle punished him by kneeling outside the door for 3 days? She muttered. But the first oracle is unwilling to do anything. If even you, then what should we do if something really happens? The consequences were not something that she could bear alone. Second oracle, why don't you go and ask the first oracle personally? The only one who was qualified to do so was the Yu Qian. However, Yu Qian's face became even gloomier after hearing this. He didn't want to go to the first oracle and be rejected again, but he had to solve this matter. After thinking for a while, he finally said, "You will go with me." In the quiet courtyard, leaves were piled up. A strong white figure suddenly flew over. It was Xue Xue. It landed gracefully, looked around, and then roared in a certain direction. Roar. There was no response. Xue Xue was stunned. A trace of doubt flashed in its ice-blue eyes. Roar. It roared again, but no one paid attention to it. What was going on? Previously, when it came, Hong Yao would come out to play with it. It leaped onto the pile of leaves and scratched it a few times with its claws. Leaves flew everywhere. Hong Yao was nestled inside, looking listless. Xue Xue tilted its head, raised its claws, and gently pushed it. Hong Yao gave it a fierce look. Very annoying. Don't disturb. Xue Xue was inexplicably angered and was confused. It subconsciously looked at the house next to it. Why are you angry with your master? Why are you venting your anger on me? Suddenly a knock came from outside. Knock knock. Hong Yao. I'm here to look for you. Dumpling's cute and clear voice sounded. Hong Yao immediately turned over and fanned Xue Xue's head with its wings. Xue Xue didn't care about it. It anxiously looked around. Where? It had to find a place to hide. Digression, the wind blows. It blows until 6 o'clock update drops. Chapter 24:13. Puff. Xue Xue plunged into the pile of fallen leaves. Hong Yao glanced at it and looked at its exposed snow-white tail with disdain. What a waste of such a big head. Its brain was also not very bright. Hong Yao raised its wings and helped Xue Xue, which was rare. It piled the fallen leaves on Xue Xue's body and barely covered it. After tidying everything up, it flew outside. It couldn't open the door, so it could only fly in the air. Bang! The red demon bumped into the barrier. Dumpling, who was waiting outside the door, heard the sound and looked up. With a light tap of her toes, she flew into the air, only separated from Hong Yao by a barrier. Hong Yao turned around and glared at Mu Qinghe's room. Hey! It shouted angrily. After a while, a hole finally opened in the barrier. Hong Yao immediately flashed out. Tuanzi brought it over at once. Hong Yao. She followed Hong Yao's line of sight and glanced over. Although she couldn't see anything, Dumpling was still angry at the thought that Mu Qinghe was inside. If it weren't for Hong Yao, she wouldn't have come here again. Suddenly, Dumpling glanced at the courtyard from the corner of her eyes and was slightly stunned. Just now, why did she feel that there was a familiar aura? Her little brows furrowed slightly. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be anyone else here except for Mu Qinghe and Hong Yao, right? Then just now, just as she was thinking, Dumpling felt that something was pulling the corner of her dress. It was Hong Yao who was dragging her out. It was not appropriate here. She'd better find another place to talk. Dumpling felt that it made sense. She immediately dispelled the doubts in her heart, picked up Hong Yao, and put it on her shoulder. Hong Yao, come with me. Dumpling took Hong Yao back to Chu Liyue's residence. Although there weren't many people in the palace of the illusory god, none of them were simple. If they saw Dumpling and the red demon together, it would cause some trouble. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Dumpling decided to take Hong Yao back. Even if it was Mu Qinghe's magical beast, it was still her friend. During this period of time, Dumpling had been struggling with this matter for a long time. In the end, she still felt that she couldn't break off her friendship with Hong Yao. Instead of suffering like this, it was better to take the initiative to attack. So today, while Chu Liyue was not in the palace of the illusory god, she went to find Hong Yao. When he returned to his residence, Chi Han was still guarding the place. However, when he saw that Dumpling had brought Hong Yao back, his expression didn't change much. Instead, he let them in directly. After entering the room, Tuanzi closed the door and asked straightforwardly, Hong Yao, break the contract with Mu Qinghe. Hong Yao was stunned. In fact, it had already guessed Dumpling's thoughts, but when it heard it for real, it still felt a little shocked. Seeing that Hong Yao was silent, Dumpling leaned over and asked, Is it because he won't let you go? Then I'll go find him later. Hong Yao shook its head. Dumpling frowned. Hong Yao, he doesn't treat you well at all. Why do you continue to stay with him? Come back and stay with us, and you. Isn't that good? She really felt that Hong Yao was not good at all with Mu Qinghe. If it could come back and continue to be with them, that would be the best. A light flashed across Hong Yao's eyes, but it quickly dimmed down. If it could, of course, it also wanted to do so. But Hong Yao was silent for a long time, and finally shook its head dejectedly. Dumpling looked at it in a daze. She had thought that Hong Yao would definitely agree to her proposal. Even if it didn't agree, it must be because it was afraid of Mu Qinghe. But now, it seemed that Hong Yao was unwilling to do so? Why? Dumpling was puzzled. Hong Yao, why? Although Mu Qinghe was its master, Ayu had been very good to it all these years. Didn't it always want to follow Ayu? Hong Yao turned its head away and refused to speak. Dumpling moved her head closer, and Hong Yao turned its head away. Dumpling went around it again, and Hong Yao turned around again. After this, Dumpling's patience was exhausted. She puffed up her cheeks. If you really don't want to, then I won't force you. Although she was a little puzzled, Dumpling couldn't get angry in her heart. Last time, Hong Yao found out about what happened in the illusionary god sea. It could be seen that Hong Yao still treated Ayu the same as before. But for some reason, it refused to agree to leave Mu Qinghe. Even though it was clearly very angry with Mu Qinghe, it didn't matter. But what exactly happened to you all these years? You can tell me, right? Dumpling sat down on the stool opposite Hong Yao. Also, Hong Yao, did you already know that Mu Qinghe betrayed Ayu back then? Hong Yao immediately shook its head frantically. How could it do this to Ayu? Dumpling stared at it closely. You're his contractual fiend. You should know something, right? Hong Yao's eyes flashed with a hint of struggle. Chi Han stood outside the door. The illusionary god palace was as cold and lonely as ever. His eyes were deep, and the scar on his face added a bit of coldness to him. No one knew what he was thinking. Bang! The sound of the door being open was heard. Chi Han turned around and saw a green shadow flying out quickly. Then, Dumpling also ran out, stood by the door and shouted, Go away. Don't come back if you leave. I won't talk to you anymore. Her small face was flushed red with anger, and her grape-like eyes were filled with glistening tears. Chi Han frowned. Did she quarrel with Hong Yao? Chapter 24:14. Hong Yao didn't even look back. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Dumpling stood there alone, holding the door frame with one hand. She pursed her lips, raised her hand, and wiped away her tears. Then, she turned around and went back into the house. Bang! She slammed the door shut without hesitation. Obviously, she was very angry. Chi-Han frowned even more. When they came back together, everything was fine. How come in the blink of an eye? He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and knocked on the door. Dumpling. Since his master wasn't around, he had to take care of her. After a short silence, a sobbing sound came from the room. Woo-woo, Chi-Han paused. After thinking for a while, he swallowed the rest of his words and continued to guard the door. Yu Qian and Xu Jing soon arrived in front of Mu Qinghe's courtyard. Looking at the still tightly shut door, the two of them looked at each other. Both of them had suffered here before. At this time, they were naturally more afraid. But this matter had to be resolved. Yu Qian raised his chin at Xu Jing. You can talk about the trouble in the Herb Mountain yourself. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't dare to say anything. He could only walk forward. She knew that Yu Qian had been punished to kneel for 3 days and 3 nights. It was already very rare for him to come with her. She didn't dare to ask Yu Qian to do anything else. However, just as she arrived in front of the door, before she could speak, she suddenly heard the sound of wings flapping. She subconsciously looked up and saw a green sparrow covered in green flames. It crossed the barrier and flew into the courtyard. Xu Jing was shocked. Then, she quickly turned around and looked at Yu Qian. Second Oracle, did you see that just now? It seemed to be a 9th grade green sparrow. Yu Qian also frowned. When did such a magical beast appear in the palace of the illusory god? And it seemed to have a close relationship with the first oracle? Otherwise, it would never fly into this place. The first oracle has a contracted magical beast? When did this happen? Xu Jing looked confused. None of the divine envoys had a contract with a magical beast. Only the second divine envoy Yu Qian was in charge of the mythological beast mountain. But now this. Yu Qian shook his head and said in a deep voice, I don't know about this. After a moment he urged, forget it. This is not something that you and I can ask about. It is better to report the matter as soon as possible, and let the first messenger make a decision. Xu Jing could only nod. Yes. She took a deep breath, turned around and bowed respectfully. First Oracle, Xu Jing has something important to report. A moment later, an indifferent and cold voice came from inside. I already know about the barrier. You can go back now. Xu Jing choked. She hadn't said anything yet, but the first divine emissary already knew. Yu Qian's expression also changed. Over the years, the first oracle had almost never come out. But many things in the illusory god palace didn't seem to escape his control. This also made Yu Qian secretly shocked again. He thought that the first oracle had made up his mind to delegate power. But in fact, he didn't have this intention at all. How could he compete with such a person? Yu Qian suppressed the chaotic thoughts in his heart and took the initiative to ask. First Oracle, this matter is of great importance. Xu Jing alone can't solve it. You don't plan to do anything? The gate of heaven is about to close. The voice continued to sound. I have my own plans. With just a few words, he had already expressed his attitude. Xu Jing and Yu Qian exchanged glances and saw a bit of confusion in each other's eyes. At this point, the first oracle still didn't show up? He said he had his own plans. What did he mean? Xu Jing wanted to continue asking, but Yu Qian had already spoken. Yes, we know. After saying that, he gave Xu Jing a look. The two of them left in unison. After walking for a while, Xu Jing couldn't help but ask. Second oracle, what do you think the first oracle is planning to do? So many things have happened in the illusory god palace during this period, but he refused to show up. He can't be like this when the gate of heaven closes, right? Impossible. Yu Qian immediately denied her guess. At that time, even the emperor will descend, let alone him. We just have to wait. Anyway, they had already said what they needed to say. If something really happened, it couldn't be completely blamed on them. Hearing that name, Xu Jing suddenly felt a deep sense of respect and fear. Immediately, she suddenly thought of something and asked hesitantly. By the way, there's something. Second oracle. Do you know what the left divine general has been busy with recently? Yu Qian glanced at her. How would I know this? The left divine general and the right divine general were the emperor's most trusted confidants. They were also the two strongest generals under him. Their status was respected, and their strength was unfathomable. Even he didn't dare to treat them casually in front of those two. How would he know this? Xu Jing nodded with some disappointment. In fact, she had already expected this result, but she was unwilling to accept it and still wanted to ask clearly. Why are you suddenly asking this? Nothing. Xu Jing forced a smile and casually came up with an excuse. But who was Yu Qian? He could see Xu Jing's thoughts clearly, but he didn't point it out. It's almost time. At that time, they will definitely appear with the emperor. If you're not in a hurry, just wait patiently. Yes. Waiting was always especially unbearable. Shang Guanjing glanced at the room again in confusion. It's been so long. These two. This game of chess, haven't they finished yet? In the room, Chu Luiyue stared at the chessboard in front of her. Her lips were slightly pale. She rubbed the chess piece in her hand and suddenly thought of something. She looked up at the man opposite her. It was also you in the Red Moon Desert. Rong Xiu's lips curled up slightly, but he didn't comment. Chu Luiyue paused. De Bao and the others knew your identity long ago? Digression. If there was a secret that needed everyone to hide together, what would it be? Chapter 24:15. Rong Xiu pondered for a moment, as if thinking about how to answer this question. But in Chu Luiyue's eyes, this reaction was already a clear answer. She sneered. This man had hidden it from her so deeply. But anyway, De Bao and the others had done similar things a long time ago. When she came to the illusory god palace for the first time and saw the Xian formations on the star path, she knew that some things were no longer under her control. In contrast, she quickly accepted Rong Xiu's identity as the first master. Rong Xiu paused and said, they didn't know about what happened to Yao Chun at the beginning. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows moved slightly. What does this mean? She narrowed her eyes slightly and fixed her gaze on the man in front of her. Rong Xiu. Why are you suddenly telling me this at this time? Chu Luiyue asked softly. First master. If Rong Xiu didn't take the initiative to say it, she probably would never have thought of it. It didn't seem to matter even if these things were to be buried under the dust of time. But he still said it, and at this time, Rong Xiu smiled. There are some things that you will know eventually. In the past, he didn't want her to know, and did everything possible to hide it. But now, he still had to say it. Rong Xiu thought of something, and a layer of darkness covered his eyes. Bright flowing lights flickered, and were reflected in his eyes, silently gathering. Chu Luiyue couldn't see through it. Rong Xiu was very thoughtful, although she thought the same as this man most of the time. When he didn't want to show anything, no one could see through his thoughts, including her. Rong Xiu suddenly asked, aren't you angry? Chu Luiyue rested her chin on one hand and rubbed the chess piece thoughtfully with the other. Why should I be angry? Although you hid it from me, didn't you tell me now? She was actually not particularly concerned about this matter, because she knew that he would never hurt her. This was an absolute certainty that came from the depths of his heart, a will that was even engraved in his bones and blood. But after this round, you have to answer all my questions truthfully. Rong Xiu's lips curved up. Of course. Chu Luiyue made up his mind and finally put down the chess piece in his hand. Time passed. These two children haven't come out yet. Are they planning to wait until the divine gate closes? In the courtyard, Shang Guanjing sat on a stone bench speechless. He had been waiting for a long time, but the doors of the two were still tightly shut, with no intention of coming out. Apart from the fluctuations that he could faintly sense from the barrier, there was nothing else. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly stood up. Forget it. I'm not waiting anymore. He should first go to the illusory god palace to take a look. He knew that Duge Mabao and Lan Xiao were trapped inside. Previously, he wanted to wait for Chu Luiyue, because he wanted to go with her and see if they could cooperate to find some clues. But now that she had not come out, she would probably be busy for a while. He could not wait any longer. Senior Shangguan, are you going to the palace of the illusory god? A crisp voice could be heard all of a sudden. Shang Guanjing turned his head. Aunt 11? Yes, what's wrong? Aunt 11 thought for a moment and shook her head. My sister and I also want to go to the palace of the illusory god. but it might be a little difficult. Shang Guanjing was a little curious. I heard the two of you talk about this before. Why? Are you curious about what it's like inside? Why don't I come back later and tell you about it? Aunt 11 shook her head. No. It's just. She was not curious. She just wanted to go in. But this feeling was really hard to describe. She pursed her lips. Then I wish you the best. Shang Guanjing did not think too much about it. He just thought that Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 were still children, and wanted to go to the palace of the illusory god to take a look. Not to mention them. Who in the entire palace of the illusory god didn't want to go in? It was normal. Just as he got up, he heard another series of footsteps. Hey, Shang Guan. Wait. Shang Guanjing turned his gaze and saw Tang Ke walking over quickly. Then, Tang Ke handed over a jade bracelet. This is the interspatial bracelet I just made recently. There are some things I prepared for Lizzie in it. Can you help me send it over? Shang Guanjing subconsciously took the bracelet and looked at him strangely. Senior Tang Ke, if you want to send it over, can't you go yourself? He was also a refining saint. It was easy for him to go in. Why did he have to ask him for help? The corner of Tang Ke's eyes twitched. This. I still have something to deal with, so I may not be able to go for the time being. Shang Guanjing looked suspicious. Something. What could happen to him? If it was before, Tang Ke was mostly helping to guide him. It would be understandable. But now, he had successfully broken through to become a refining saint. Logically speaking, Tang Ke should be free, right? Besides, everyone knew how Tang Ke treated Suli. He clearly missed Suli very much, but he refused to go to the palace of the illusory god. Senior Tang Ke, is it inconvenient? Shang Guanjing asked tentatively. Tang Ke hurriedly waved his hand. No. I really can't get away for the time being. Wait for a while, I'll go over. Shang Guanjing did not quite believe his excuse. But since the other party had already said so much, there was no need to continue asking. He nodded. Senior Tang Ke, don't worry. I'll definitely help you send it over. Tang Ke secretly heaved a sigh of relief, gave a few more instructions and went back. The door was closed. Shang Guanjing was stunned. It seemed that Tang Ke really did not plan to go now. He put away the bracelet and headed in the direction of the palace of the illusory god. Shang Guanjing entered the palace of the illusory god very smoothly and quickly found Su Li's residence. He asked you to send it over? Su Li played with the bracelet in her hand. Her usually gentle eyebrows were tinged with interest at this time. It seems that he's really busy. Shang Guanjing was speechless. Why did he suddenly feel cold? But fortunately, Su Li still accepted the bracelet. She raised her head and asked, How is little you are now? I haven't seen her these few days. Shang Guanjing briefly explained the situation to him. Su Li suddenly understood. I see. But Holy Sun is really strange. Why does he want to play chess with little Yu at this time? Shang Guanjing shook his head. Both of them have their own ideas. Maybe they have other plans. And Rongxiu's strength is tyrannical. The two of them can also improve their strength by exchanging pointers. He was also familiar with Rongxiu. He deeply knew that the strength he displayed was far from what it seemed on the surface. Su Li nodded and said, You're right. But now little Yu has finished walking the Star Road and comprehended all the Xian formations on it. Logically speaking, she's already very powerful. After a while, the gate of heaven will close. I don't know if she can ascend to heaven and become a god at that time. Chapter 24:16. She doesn't have a bloodline totem. Su Li frowned slightly. Shang Guanjing paused. Actually, to him, this matter was also a mystery that he couldn't solve. Because he knew very well that Chu Luiyue had a bloodline power in her body. But it didn't belong to the Shangguan family. Even though he founded the Tianling dynasty single-handedly, and went to the Divine Ruins world later, and made a name for himself, that was all later. Chu Luiyue shouldn't have a bloodline power in the first place. Shang Guanjing used to be very curious about this. He wanted to ask about it several times, but he didn't have the chance. Until now, Chu Luiyue successfully entered the palace of the illusory god, which shocked everyone. In fact, All of this was because Jin Yunlai didn't detect Chu Liuyue's bloodline power at the gate of heaven. Shang Guanjing knew that there must be something wrong with this. But he didn't know the details, and he couldn't find the time to ask her recently. She should be able to, right? Shang Guanjing said, his voice a little vague. Su Li nodded. That's true. It's hard to say. After all, those divine envoys said that she couldn't open the door of the palace of the illusory god. But isn't she fine now? Chu Liyue had too many trump cards and secrets. Shang Guanjing changed the topic. By the way, I wonder if Mr. Su has found anything while you're here? Su Li sighed helplessly. The palace of the illusory god is heavily guarded. It's really hard to find out. That's true. Shang Guanjing wasn't surprised by this result. This matter couldn't be rushed. If it was really so easy to find, then he would suspect that there was something wrong with the palace of the illusory god. But Su Li suddenly thought of something, and her expression changed slightly. But what? I saw someone go to the Chaos Holy Jade. Hesitation appeared on her face. Shang Guanjing's expression froze. What's going on? Is there something wrong with the Chaos Holy Jade? The missing piece was now in Chu Liuyue's hands. He couldn't help but worry. Su Li held her breath and shook her head. Actually, it's not the Holy Primal Chaos Jade. It's the white jade pillars at the side. I saw someone go over there and add something to them. Shang Guanjing was dumbfounded. Due to the distance, I couldn't see it very clearly. I only saw that after that thing was added, the flame on the white jade pillar burned even more vigorously than before. Su Li bit her lip. Shang Guanjing frowned as countless guesses flashed through his mind. When he came in, he had an impression of those white jade pillars. He paused for a moment and said slowly, "This doesn't seem to be wrong? Wasn't the flame on the white jade pillar burning all the time? That's the problem." Su Li's voice became softer. "I've already asked Xiao Ran before, and he said that these white jade pillars were indestructible 10,000 years ago. There is no need to add anything at all." "You mean this?" Xiao Ran, who was lying lazily in his courtyard, paused when he heard the two's question. He sat up with a toothpick in his mouth. "Yeah, it's always been like that." He raised his chin and looked in the direction of the illusory god palace's main hall. The chaotic holy jade is closely related to the divine master. The flame on those white jade pillars was also nourished by the divine master's own divine power. That's why it hasn't been extinguished for 10,000 years. Is there a problem? Shang Guanjing and Su Li looked at each other. It seemed that Xiao Ran didn't know that the white jade pillars needed extra care. Now, it was purely an accident that Su Li saw it that day. She didn't think there was a problem at first, but then she met Xiao Ran and chatted with him. When she heard Xiao Ran's words, she knew that something was wrong and immediately suppressed the matter. When she asked again today as expected, "What's with your expressions?" Xiao Ran bit the toothpick and looked back and forth between the two. "Everyone in the illusory god palace knows about this." "Oh, right, you just came here not long ago. So it's normal that you don't know about this." Su Li showed a look of understanding, and her eyes darkened. "I see. In that case, there really was a problem." At this moment, a gust of wind blew. Something fluttered down from the sky. Su Li looked up curiously and reached out to catch the thing. She was stunned. This was a peach blossom. It was pinkish white, with pink petals and a swaying stamen. It was just right. Su Li was wondering where this thing came from when Xiao Ran suddenly stood up and looked at the peach blossom in her hand in shock. How could this be? Su Li and Shang Guanjing were both puzzled. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? It was just a peach blossom. Although it was a little strange that it appeared here, there didn't seem to be such a big reaction, right? Xiao Ran stared at the peach blossom and reached out to take it. Soon, the pinkish-white color on it gradually faded. A wisp of golden and black intertwined. Seeing this change, the expressions of the two beside him changed. This was obviously not a real peach blossom. Xiao Ran looked up in a certain direction and frowned. Could it be? Because the gate of heaven is about to close? This was a peach blossom in the abandoned garden. But why would it be blown here? He remembered that Chu Liyue had mentioned this to him before. At that time, he only said not to be too involved with it. But now, It seemed that there was a problem with the abandoned garden. Xiaoran! Xiaoran! Su Li waved her hand in front of Xiaoran. Only then did he come back to his senses. His expression was still complicated. Don't ask anymore. This matter. Don't mention it again. The two of them exchanged glances. Originally, they wanted to find out more information, but seeing Xiaoran like this, it was obvious that he wouldn't say anything. Okay. Everyone was smart. There was no need to say anything else. Soon, they reached a consensus and stopped talking about this matter. Xiaoran asked again. By the way, where's that girl? He hadn't seen her for a long time. Shang Guanjing answered casually. She's playing chess. Xiaoran was speechless. What time is it now? How can he be so free? He looked at the sky and said, It's almost time. It's almost time. Don't forget to remind her to come back. This is the only chance to ascend to the heavens and become a god in 10,000 years. After Su Li and Shang Guanjing responded, they quickly left. Xiaoran lay down again and picked up the peach blossom in his hand. The wind blew and turned it into powder silently. He frowned and sighed softly after a long time. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, there were only 3 days left before the gate of heaven closed. The atmosphere in the illusory god palace was extremely tense. Everyone was waiting for that day to come. Wu Yao stood in front of the gate of heaven with his arms crossed in front of his chest, staring at the gate of heaven in front of him. Suddenly a voice sounded. Why are you still here? Chapter 24:17. Wu Yao turned around and saw a familiar face. The corners of his lips twitched as he smiled. Oh, why is the 11th oracle here? He glanced outside the heavenly gate. No one had come up yet. It had been a year since the heavenly gate opened. Those who could come up would have come up long ago. Qiu Tong looked at him coldly. I should be the one asking you that. You've been coming here every day for the past few months. What do you want? He had been paying attention to Wu Yao for a long time. He didn't cultivate or go anywhere else. It was as if he was going to stay here forever. At first, Qiu Tong was worried that he wanted to do something, but after staring at him for a while, he realized that Wu Yao really didn't do anything. He just stood there and looked at the heavenly gate for an entire day or even a few days. The heavenly gate had been like this for 10,000 years. What was there to look at? Qiu Tong was unhappy about this. However, Wu Yao had never done anything out of line, so he couldn't be too harsh on him. But it was different now. Wu Yao had an innocent look on his face. I'm just here in a daze. Can't I do that? Qiu Tong frowned. There was no sincerity in this answer. He took a step forward and said coldly, From today onwards you can't. There were only 3 days left before the heavenly gate would close. A person like Wu Yao naturally couldn't stay here any longer. This was also the reason why he had come today. Wu Yao, I can't just stand here and watch. No. Then I'll stand further away. Qiu Tong's expression became even colder. Wu Yao wasn't stupid. He immediately raised his hand. Okay, I'll leave. He didn't want to fight with this oracle. It wasn't worth it. With that, he finally lifted his leg and left. Behind him, Qiu Tong's gaze was fixed on him, sharp and cold. Wu Yao scoffed in his heart, rubbed his fists, shrugged and left. It wasn't until Wu Yao's figure completely disappeared from sight that Qiu Tong's expression softened. He came to the heavenly gate and looked outside. A silver bridge stretched all the way down to the dark and treacherous sea. The water was cold and wet. Vaguely, there seemed to be a faint smell of blood spreading with the wind. Qiu Tong frowned. It had been a long time since the banquet and Jiulong's punishment in the illusionary god sea. But until now, they still hadn't returned. The first oracle had no intention of relenting. There were only 3 days left. Could it be that he had to continue waiting? He shook his head. Inside the room, on the chessboard, the black go pieces and the scarlet gold go pieces were fighting intensely. More than half of the chessboard had been filled. Chu Luyue gently exhaled. This was not an easy match. Every ray of light and every chess piece on it contained an astonishing amount of power. Every time she placed a chess piece, she would have to endure an extremely harsh and even terrifying power. Even now, before the game was over, The energy in her body had already been exhausted. It was almost as if he could not hold on any longer. Even her hand, which was holding the chess piece, was trembling slightly. But the man opposite her did not say a word. His eyes were deep, and it was difficult to guess what he was thinking. Chu Liyue thought for a long time, and finally chose a position. She raised her hand and placed a chess piece. Pack! The scarlet gold go piece had just landed when it was quickly and crazily torn apart by the terrifying power around it. In an instant the go piece shattered. Chu Liyue's body shook, and blood slowly flowed out of the corner of her mouth. She supported herself with one hand on the table. Her face was extremely pale, and her body was trembling slightly. If not for that, she would have collapsed. Rongxiu's hand in his sleeve slowly clenched. On the back of his hand, green veins appeared clearly. Then he said, "Continue." His voice was cold and low. Chu Liyue slowly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She used all her energy to channel it into her fingertips. Her movements were extremely slow. If anyone else was here, they would definitely see that Chu Liyue had reached her limit. She was almost unable to lift her hand. But Rongxiu did not move. He just sat quietly opposite her, waiting patiently. Chu Liyue gritted her teeth, and finally placed another chess piece. Clang! The sound of a zither suddenly rang out from her body. Chu Liyue's eyebrows twitched. Then she felt a wave coming from the interspatial ring on her hand. That was, the stones brought back from the god-slaying mound were agitated. She was shocked and opened her eyes slightly. Pack! Rongxiu opposite her had placed another chess piece. Chu Liyue looked up, and her pupils shrank slightly. The black go piece had almost forced her into a dead end. There was no way to retreat. Another sound of a zither rang out. Chu Liyue suddenly realized something. This was not the first two pieces of music. This was the last piece of music. She suddenly looked up at Rongxiu. He said, "It's not over yet." In the god-slaying mound, the sky was dark and dark clouds gathered. A rough wind blew across the wilderness, stirring up the sand. Everything was foggy, as if covered with a layer of gauze. It was impossible to see clearly. There was no one here. It was as silent as a huge tomb. Countless broken tombstones were scattered on the ground, full of indescribable desolation and sorrow. The black wall that stood between the heavens and the earth was silent. After a long time, there seemed to be a voice, laughing but not laughing. Finally, this day has come? She had really waited for a long time. Digression 6 o'clock. Chapter 24:18. The sound of the zither rang out, solemn and desolate. Sound after sound rang out in succession. It was slow and firm, creating a unique melody. That was the third zither score. At this moment, under the combined effects of many forces, the last piece of the zither score hidden in Chu Liyue's body began to merge. Every sound fell clearly into her ears, enveloping her. The entire room seemed to be squeezed tight by the sound of the zither. The blood in her body surged rapidly, almost boiling. Chu Liyue took a deep breath, swallowed the thick blood between her lips and teeth, and continued playing. A layer of dazzling golden barrier surrounded the entire room. No matter how much energy there was, it was completely devoured and annihilated. Not a single bit leaked out. Therefore, even though they were close by, the others in the courtyard did not know what was going on inside. Wu Yao returned to the courtyard, only glanced over a few times, then went to the back to practice his martial arts. Hua Shuangshuang opened the door, and the golden-winged black-boned beast instantly flew over. At his feet, a small wind-treading tiger also jumped onto his calf. He laughed heartily, and picked up the small wind-treading tiger. Little Hachi was sleeping on a rattan chair, her head slightly tilted. Beside her was a basket of flower petals, in which lay a few exquisite jade bottles. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 were sitting side by side not far away, holding the pills they had just taken from Jian Fengqi. Aunt 11 threw one pill in each hand, and accurately caught them. Aunt 12 poured them out as usual, counted them carefully, and put them into her mouth one by one, puffing her cheeks slightly. In a certain room, Cinny was standing in front of a table, staring at the map in front of him. He held a brush in his hand, and from time to time, he would sketch something on it. Lu Feng walked in. "Big brother, you were looking for me?" Cinny nodded. rolled up the map, and handed it over. Make a sand table according to this. Lu Feng took it with both hands, a strange expression on his face. Why did Big Brother suddenly want to make a sand table at this time? He muttered in his heart as he opened the map. The lines were complicated and extremely chaotic. Lu Feng was stunned for a moment. Then she looked carefully. But when he looked at it, he saw a few words hidden under the layers of messy lines. The corners of his eyes twitched as he looked at Sun Yi in disbelief. Big Brother, this is... Can you do it in 3 days? Sun Yi asked calmly. Lu Feng swallowed hard. Why did Big Brother still have such a cold expression? Does he know that this is... As if sensing his gaze, Sun Yi raised his eyes slightly and looked over. At this moment, Lu Feng's heart trembled violently. Then, he lowered his head to take a look. With a glance, he saw a few familiar names. This map could be said to be the most complicated one he had ever seen. There was no other. So during this period of time, Big Brother had shut himself in and not come out. Was busy with this? His throat felt dry. His heart was beating violently, as if he had already vaguely guessed Sun Yi's plans. But he didn't ask. After a short period of silence, he solemnly put away the item and nodded. Yes. Phoenix Cry Mountain. Dumpling sat alone at the top of the mountain, resting her chin on one hand, and caressing the 2-Tian baby in front of her with the other. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. There were a total of 7 leaves. Perhaps it was because Phoenix Cry Mountain contained an extremely abundant amount of energy, but this 2-Tian baby grew especially fast after coming here. It hadn't been long, but it had already grown to this extent. Sigh. Do you think you'll grow the 8th leaf first, or I'll open my 8th meridian first? Dumpling asked with a serious expression. No one answered. A gentle breeze blew, and the emerald leaves swayed with it. Dumpling sighed, and summoned the ancestor's golden feather. Her chubby little hands held the pure gold feather carefully. She stared at it for a while and pouted slightly. Grandpa Clan Leader was still asleep. She had tried many times to wake him up, but there was no progress. Dumpling guessed that she would have to wait until she opened her 9th meridian. She held the ancestor's golden feather, and looked at it for a while. Suddenly a voice sounded. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately put away the ancestor's golden feather, stood up, and looked at the person who came. However, when she saw that it was Mao Zhen, she relaxed a little. Mao Zhen sized up Dumpling and secretly exclaimed. He had long known that Dumpling was sent here to cultivate, but he didn't know that she had improved so much in such a short period of time. The aura on her body was many times stronger than when he first met her. Grandpa Mao Zhen? Dumpling called out crisply. She knew that Mao Zhen had already been at Fengming Mountain for more than half a month, but because he had only been walking around nearby, and did not go up the mountain, the two of them did not meet. Today was the first time they officially met. This call made Mao Zhen's heart burst with joy. Although Dumpling was from the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, her soft and cute appearance was too lethal. When had Mao Zhen ever been called grandfather by such a little kid? Hearing this, his entire heart melted, and even his expression became gentler and more amiable. Hey, good Dumpling. Mao Zhen replied, grinning from ear to ear. Dumpling asked curiously, Grandpa Mao Zhen, what are you doing here? Speaking of this, Mao Zhen's expression became slightly restrained. After a moment he sighed softly. I came to pay my respects to the ancestors. Dumpling was stunned. When she reacted, her face was filled with shock. Ancestor? But this was Fengming Mountain. Chapter 24:19. Didn't the second divine envoy say that this used to be Ancestor Yi Ling's territory? Why would Mao Zhen come here if he wanted to pay respects to his ancestors? Looking at Dumpling's terrified expression, Mao Zhen held his forehead helplessly. Dumpling, don't think too much. It's just that the great phoenix dragon ancestor also died here. Oh, I see. Dumpling thought about it, and finally understood what he meant. She heaved a sigh of relief, but on second thought she frowned again. But, I've been here for a long time, but I don't seem to sense the aura of the great Phoenix Dragon clan. This place was filled with the power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. If Mao Zhen didn't say it, she wouldn't have thought of it. Mao Zhen's expression froze. Then he forced a smile that didn't seem to be smiling. This, I know. Dumpling saw that his expression wasn't right. She placed her hands behind her back and lightly drew on the ground with the tip of her foot. After a while, she asked softly, Grandpa Mao Zhen, did I say something wrong? She seemed to have said something that she shouldn't have. Mao Zhen was slightly stunned. Then he smiled and shook his head. No, it's all in the past. It has nothing to do with you. Don't take it to heart. Dumpling replied with an oh and sighed softly. Although she was young, she was smart and sensitive. She sensed that Mao Zhen's emotions seemed to be a little off, so she didn't say anything. Mao Zhen changed the topic. You're about to open your 8th meridian? Dumpling blinked and nodded. Yes. There was nothing to hide. After all, her ultimate goal was to open her 9th meridian. Mao Zhen sighed. Very good. He had actually opened his 8th meridian. He originally had the chance to open his 9th meridian. Unfortunately, many things happened back then, and it was delayed. It was already very difficult to live again. So he didn't have any extravagant hopes. When he saw Dumpling, he knew very well that she indeed had hopes of opening her 9th meridian. Hearing this answer, he couldn't help but sigh. Dumpling asked curiously, Grandpa Mao Zhen, how did you get here? That divine envoy was willing to let you in? This was really strange. After all, apart from you, no one else was allowed to casually enter this place. It was the same for the other oracles. Mao Zhen nodded. Yes, but it's time for me to leave. Dumpling felt a little disappointed. After all, it was too boring for her to stay here alone. After quarreling with Red Demon, it didn't come again. She was the only one left here. Then, Grandpa Mao Zhen, how is Ayu now? Dumpling asked nervously. Previously, she had vaguely sensed that something was wrong with Ayu's situation. But it was not appropriate for her to go out now. She knew that Yu Qian was keeping a close eye on her. On the surface, there was no contract between her and Ayu. If she went now, it would definitely arouse suspicion. Mao Zhen was stunned. I haven't seen her in a while. But it should be pretty good, right? She had entered the illusory god palace. No matter what others thought, she was already standing at the very top. There was nothing for her to worry about. Dumpling pursed her lips. She knew that she couldn't get anything out of Mao Zhen. That's good. Puff. Suddenly, a subtle sound came from Dumpling's side. She looked down in surprise, and her big grape-like eyes immediately widened. The heaven-wrecking holy seed had actually sprouted an 8th leaf. Just at that moment, almost at the same time, she felt that there seemed to be a vigorous force in her body that suddenly stirred up a storm. Dumpling was shocked and subconsciously looked in a certain direction. What was going on with Yu? Why did her strength suddenly soar? All that was left in Chu Liuyue's ears was the sound of the zither. The tune seemed to come from a very distant time and space, but it also seemed to fly up from the deepest corner of her body. One song, one sound. She supported herself on the table with one hand. Because of the force, her knuckles were faintly white. The other hand was holding a chess piece. Her eyes reflected the resplendent light on the chessboard. Other than that, there was nothing else. She gritted her teeth and put down the chess piece in her hand. Smack! In an instant, the surrounding power rushed in crazily. Chu Liuyue's eyes were dark and bright. She stared without blinking. She had almost exhausted all the strength in her body and was now in a state of overdraft. She was purely relying on the last of her willpower to hold on. However, in the unseen world, every time she thought that she was going to die, there would always be a surge of power in her body. That was the power that had been accumulated in various parts of her body over the years. It could be seen that she was now forced into a desperate situation. In such a desperate situation, she could only fight back. However, from the beginning to the end, the gorgeous water droplet in her dantian did not produce any waves. If she had the support of this power, she would not have been so cruel. But there was none. Therefore, Chu Liyue could only desperately search for the remaining power in her body and piece together the third zither score bit by bit. Waves of exhaustion rushed in, and the sound of the zither almost broke her eardrums. Only in her dantian, the first 2 zither scores that had been fused were still silent and did not give any response. Only that dazzling radiance quietly flickered. Illusory God Palace. Creak. The door opened, and a tall figure walked out of the room. He was wearing a gray-blue brocade robe. His steps were calm and his temperament was calm. He was walking towards the main hall of the Illusory God Palace. Digression. God, why do I feel like I'm taking a big step towards the end? I don't want to whimper. Chapter 24:20. It was quiet all around. Only a gentle breeze blew, lifting up the corner of his clothes. His eyes were calm and indifferent. No emotions could be seen. Soon, he arrived in front of the main hall and stood still. In front of him, there were 9 flights of stairs. He lifted his foot and went up. When he arrived in front of the main hall, a heavy pressure shrouded him. He pushed the door open and entered. He stopped in the middle of the hall, held his breath, and bowed his head. First Messenger Mu Qinghe greets the Divine Master. There was no one in the hall. Countless lights on the surrounding walls flickered. After a long time, a low and hoarse voice finally sounded from the hall. The gate of heaven close. Mu Qinghe said respectfully. Yes, Divine Master. After that, he turned around and went outside the hall again. But this time, a heavy and majestic bronze bell appeared in the air in front of the main hall of the palace of the Illusory God. He came in front of the bronze bell. An array of divine power flew out and hit it hard. Dong! The boundless and distant sound of the bell reverberated throughout the world. At this moment, all the creatures in every corner of the palace of the Illusory God heard the sound of the bell. Herb Mountain. Xu Jing looked at the boundary, with a faint green light not far in front of her and frowned. Hearing the sound of the bell, she suddenly raised her head and looked in the direction of the palace of the Illusory God. The first messenger finally came in person and closed the door by ringing the bell. Then, she took a deep breath and headed in the direction of the palace of the Illusory God. Only the celestial physician who was collecting herbs or practicing alchemy on the mountain peak in the distance looked up. They were nervous, excited, and uneasy. Lightning pool. A huge seal froze the lightning pool. It was silent, but looking down from the sky, one could still see the countless lightning pool that seemed to have frozen. Silver and gold intertwined, revealing a cold light. Mu Dongyu fixed her gaze, and then her figure flashed and disappeared from the sky above the lightning pool. At this moment, on the shore of the lightning pool, a tall figure stood quietly. It was Xi Jing. He stood on top of a black reef, holding a hammer in one hand and a fist in the other. His muscles bulged from head to toe, as if they contained endless power. And in front of him, the lightning pool was like a thick layer of ice, unmoving. Hearing the sound of the bell, Qi Han's expression froze, and he looked up. His face was colder than usual, and the scar on his face made him look even more severe. No one knew what he was thinking, but a dark color surged in his eyes, making it hard to fathom. The sound of the bell also spread to the courtyards of the Illusory God Palace. 12 Nyang stopped chewing, but half of her cheeks were still bulging. She looked up curiously. Who is ringing the bell? She asked in a small voice. Aunt 11 looked in the direction of the voice and squinted her eyes. Then, she raised her head and poured all the remaining pills into her mouth. This movement startled Aunt 12. Sister Yu, why are you eating in such a hurry? Aunt 11 wiped her mouth and gave a concise explanation. The divine gate is about to close. I'm afraid a storm is about to come. Aunt 12 heard this and subconsciously clenched the remaining pills in her hand. She asked nervously, Will that affect us? Aunt 11 nodded with certainty. Of course it will. After the divine gate closes, our master will enter the Illusory God Palace and ascend to the heavens. Of course it has a lot to do with us. Aunt 12 thought. Oh, yes. We still have to cheer for our master. This could not be delayed. Thinking of this, she looked back. The door to that room was still tightly shut. Her hands moved at lightning speed as she stuffed the remaining pills into her mouth one by one. While chewing with great effort, she said in a muffled voice, I can't be a burden to our master. Mu Hongyu stood in front of the door, frowning slightly. This day had finally come, but there was still no progress on her master's side. After the fight with Mu Qinghe and Bailing in the Illusory God Sea, She and Chu Luiyue had not been there again. The other party was very strict. Even if she was now in the Mahayana realm, she could not do anything. During this period, Mu Hongyu had thought of many ways in private, but unfortunately they were useless. They said that Diwu Zhangze was a traitor of the illusory god palace, so he would never be released. Anyone would treat a traitor like this. But how did he become a traitor of the illusory god palace? What exactly happened back then? Hey Hongyu. A familiar voice came. Mu Hongyu turned and saw Jian Fengqi walking out of the room, half leaning on the door frame, his posture lazy. Can we discuss something? Mu Hongyu raised her eyebrows. What? What was there to discuss between them? Jian Fengqi raised his chin, his peach blossom eyes glittering. Haven't you broken through the Mahayana realm now? Then, take me to the illusory god palace, how about it? Mu Hongyu snorted. Do you really think it's so easy to enter that place? Jian Fengqi meant that she should secretly take him in. But how could it be so easy? Besides, she was not very willing to do so. Jian Fengqi blinked his eyes, looking very elegant and charming. Our little Hongyu is so powerful, you must have a way, right? Others can't, but you definitely can. Mu Hongyu crossed her arms, looked him up and down, and smiled meaningfully. Don't you have a good personal relationship with the first oracle? Why don't you go to him yourself? Isn't it better to go in openly than sneaking in? Jian Fengqi's expression froze. Then he put away his folding fan, pressed his forehead and smiled awkwardly. What a joke! Mu Qinghe could even do something to Chu Luiyue, let alone him. Was he tired of living that he would throw his life away like this? Would it be easier to die? Or would it be better to die in a better way? He did have a good relationship with Mu Qinghe in the past, but that was in the past. Not to mention other things. After he came to the illusory god palace, he had not even seen Mu Qinghe's face. If Mu Hongyu had not told him this, he would not have known that Mu Qinghe was the first oracle. Although Jian Fengqi had always felt good about himself, he still cherished his life very much. That was so many years ago. Maybe to him, it was a matter of his previous life. Jian Fengqi coughed and refused. Mu Hongyu snorted coldly. Because of the injustice she felt towards Mu Qinghe, Jian Fengqi was now an eyesore to her. Little Hachi stretched and got up from the recliner, muttering in a low voice. What are you doing? So noisy. Suddenly, a tall figure walked over and stood in front of her. The tall figure cast a shadow that instantly enveloped her. Her beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, and her mind was still in a daze. Brother Yanqing? Chapter 24-21. Her voice was soft and gentle. At this moment, she was still rubbing her eyes with one hand and stretching her waist, revealing a slender and white waist. Against the dazzling and exquisite beaded tassels, it was even more clear and eye-catching. It was like a hand that could be easily grasped. Yanqing's hands behind his back slowly clenched. He looked away and his gaze fell on her face. She covered her face with one hand, only revealing a half-closed eye. Perhaps because she had just woken up, her eyes were still a bit watery. Charming and soft, yet clear and innocent. Like a gorgeous and fragile glass, but also like a flower in full bloom. No one could stop her beauty. Yanqing was stunned. Even if he was used to seeing this enchanting face, at this moment, he still. The few vague syllables that came out of her red lips, at this moment, seemed to fall on his heart more clearly than the sound of the bell from the illusory god palace. A fierce blow. Suddenly, he didn't know where to look. Little Hachi didn't notice the subtle change in his expression, and only looked at him blankly. At this moment, she came back to her senses and smiled. Why aren't you saying anything? Yanqing held his breath for a moment, his eyes lingering on her smile for a moment. Then he said lightly, Nothing. The gate of heaven is about to close. Seeing that you were still sleeping, I thought of waking you up. It was rare for him to say so much at once. Little Eight blinked, and turned around to take a look. I was wondering why he would ring the bell in the middle of the day. She stood up lazily. Although she wasn't interested in these things, she knew very well that the closing of the gate of heaven meant that countless cultivators in the illusory god palace would try to ascend to the heavens and become gods. It would be very lively. She still wanted to see this. Yin Qing was originally standing in front of the recliner. When little Hachi stood up, the distance between the two was instantly shortened. A warm and fragrant wind blew over. It was the smell of her body. Yin Qing calmly took a step back. Little Hachi glanced at him and secretly laughed. Lord Yin Qing, are you so afraid of me? When she came back to her senses, she realized that she was still in her own courtyard. So she naturally reverted to how she addressed him. Yin Qing's eyes drooped slightly and her voice was cold. Little Hachi misunderstood. The rest of his words suddenly stopped. A soft, boneless hand had already landed on his shoulder and gently patted him. I was just joking. Yin Qing Darren is upright and outspoken. It's not the first time this miss knows that she has restrained herself and returned to etiquette. Little Hachi smiled at him. Thanks. Yin Qing pursed her lips. However, Little 8 quickly retracted his hand and walked towards Aunt 11 and the others while holding the corner of his skirt. Aya, the heavenly gate is about to close. Why didn't you call me? I almost missed such a big show. The sound gradually faded away. 12th Nyang opened her mouth softly. Sister 8, didn't you say that I wasn't allowed to wake you up when you were sleeping? She said that it was a beauty sleep to maintain one's appearance. In the past, every time Sister 8 was woken up from her sleep, she would go berserk. Although Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 were well taken care of, and did not suffer this kind of torture, they did see the scene of the other members of the 13th, you being chased by her. Her heart palpitated. She looked at little Hachi strangely. Sister 8, why aren't you angry this time? Aunt 11's voice was calm as she reminded her. That's Sister 8's husband. He's different from us after all. Little Hachi, I already said that it was a misunderstanding. It really was a misunderstanding. At this moment, little Hachi suddenly felt a gaze on her. She subconsciously straightened her shoulders and raised her voice. Of course it's because the one who woke up Sister 8 was the one who hit the bell. It's not appropriate to vent your anger on Darren Yin Qing. The two girls looked at her with their eyes wide open. That gaze seemed to have moved away again. Little Hachi's ears inexplicably heated up, and she hurriedly asked, Cough, who hit the bell? The two girls looked at each other and shook their heads. Of course it's the first oracle. UMO, who appeared out of nowhere, added. He's the only one who's qualified. Little Hachi looked at him strangely. How do you know? UMO. Who told you to be so talkative? You were just watching the show in the dark on a whim. And now you're telling the truth. Yin Qing glanced at him coldly, and had no intention of helping him. UMO looked up at the sky. This? Everyone knows. Really? Go out and ask. Who hasn't heard of this in the illusory god palace? Besides, it's obvious that it's the first oracle. Little Hachi stared at him for a while. Is that so? UMO silently shut his mouth. Yin Qing, this brat, really forgot about his brothers when he got a wife. Let's see how he's going to explain it to them later. Thinking of this, Yumo's mood finally improved. He touched his chin and chuckled. Why haven't Master and His Highness Saint come out yet? Aunt 11 asked. Her voice immediately broke Yumo's fantasy. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he turned around to look. It seems that Master's situation isn't any better. Dong. The sound of the bell came from afar and fell into her ears. Chu Liuyue's heart trembled. At this moment, a ray of light flashed through her mind. She almost couldn't control herself and placed the last piece. Clap. Clang. The fragmented sounds of the zither had finally connected completely. The third zither music score, complete reunion. A gorgeous water droplet appeared in her dantian. Compared to the previous one, this one was much smaller. Then, without any warning, it suddenly slammed into the original one. Boom. Chapter 24-22. Chu Liuyue's mind buzzed, and she momentarily blanked out. However, she soon realized that the situation was different from what she had expected. Following this incomparably violent collision, the water droplet from before was suddenly split into two. The three water droplets that shone brilliantly were suspended in the air, facing each other. The third zither score did not merge with the first two. It was even dismantled. Chu Liyue was stunned. Suddenly, there was a fluctuation of energy in front of her. She looked up and saw that Rong Xiao had also raised his hand and placed the last chess piece. The black chess piece slashed down like a sharp blade. It completely cut off the reddish-gold chess piece's escape route. This round had finally come to an end. There was no doubt that Chu Liuyue's side was completely defeated. Rong Xiao's power was too strong and almost completely destroyed her chess piece. She exhaled softly and looked at the chess game for a while. Then the corners of her lips curled up. A faint trace of blood was still faintly visible. I lost. Although she had said this many times, it was different this time. She lost. Very happily. So this is your real strength, she murmured softly and looked up. Her dark eyes shone with a faint light that was dazzling. All these years, she had been trying to figure out Rong Xiao's strength, but it was hard to guess. Today she finally understood. Moreover, she knew very well that Rong Xiao's purpose in this game of chess was to help her merge the third zither score. She tried and found that the 3 water droplets could no longer merge. In other words, there was indeed a complete zither score in her body. However, it was divided into 3 parts, and they could not merge with each other. After a few tries, Chu Liyue found that the water droplets did not move. Thus she did not force it. Anyway, the third part had been sorted out. All she needed was an opportunity to officially merge them. She looked out of the window and laughed. The bell. Looks like the gate of heaven is really closing. Shall we go together? Rong Xiao waved his sleeve, and the chessboard between the two disappeared quietly. He finally got up and walked over. Chu Liyue looked at him strangely. Why? Rong Xiao came to her and bent down slightly. He grabbed her slender waist with his long arm and pulled her into his arms. Now she had no strength in her body. Even moving a finger was extremely strenuous. Previously, she was barely holding on with her willpower. Now that Rong Xiao came, she instantly lost all her strength and fell into his arms. Before she could react, she felt her chin being pinched by a strong hand. She was forced to raise her head, and his kiss had already covered the sky and earth. He hugged her very tightly, as if he wanted to crush her and melt her into his flesh and blood. It was the same with his kiss. It was as if there was a trace of almost uncontrollable madness. The taste of blood in his mouth caused him to tighten his grip. Then he moved the hand that was holding her chin down and held her hand. Her slightly curled hand was effortlessly stretched open by him. His well-defined and powerful fingers passed through the gaps between her fingers and intertwined with hers. Then, Chu Liyue felt a warm and powerful force enter her body through her palm. She moved, as if she wanted to say something. But he held her even tighter. Chu Liyue was a little confused. Although she had lost more than half of her strength, now that the Guqin score was in her body, she only needed to recuperate for a while to recover. But Rong Xiao, she rarely saw him like this. No, or rather, she had never seen it before. It was as if he was desperately trying to hold on to something, with some kind of suppressed emotion that was about to burst out. Her heart suddenly ached. She raised her head slightly and licked his lips in response. She snuggled tightly in his arms. Even if her bones were about to be crushed by this force, she still wanted to give him more. Rong Xiao. Rong Xiao. Her syllables were blurred between her lips and teeth, broken and overflowing. I am, she said in a low and firm voice. This voice seemed to have finally woken Rong Xiao up. His movements slowed down and became much gentler. He finally let her go and kissed her lips gently, between her eyebrows and the top of her head. A low and slightly hoarse voice came from the top of her head. Wait for me in the illusory god palace. Chu Liyue's body was still a little weak. She held his arm and leaned on his firm and warm chest. Her nose was very familiar with the cold fragrance that made her feel at ease. She was a little confused, but she remembered that Rong Xiao had said before that he would go to the illusory god palace with her, so she nodded. Okay, I'll wait for you. Creak. The door was opened from the inside. Everyone in the courtyard raised their eyes and looked over. Chu Liyue's figure came into view. Little Hachi was happy at first, then looked behind her and asked curiously, Master, where is His Highness the Holy Sun? Not coming. With that person's strength, It didn't seem difficult for him to enter the illusory god palace. Chu Liyue said, "He's a little late. Let's go first." Perhaps it was because of the nourishment of Rongxiu's power. Her body had almost recovered in this short period of time. Her face and lips were originally very pale. But after being held in his arms for a while before coming out, it was basically not too obvious. So no one could see anything wrong with her. Chu Liyue turned around and closed the door. From the corner of her eyes, she saw Rongxiu standing in the room, quietly looking at her. The light from outside came in, reflecting half of his face in light and half in darkness. Half was immersed in the bright light, half was immersed in the cold. Like the intersection of light and darkness. Untouchable. Digression 6 o'clock. Chapter 24-23. Creak bang. The sound of a door closing could be heard from afar. Chu Liyue's heart shook as she looked back. Looking from afar, the divine heavenly gate that was shining brilliantly was slowly closing. At the same time, countless figures were heading towards the palace of the illusory god. The wind was blowing and the clouds were surging. Chu Liyue slowly exhaled. To the palace of the illusory god. Those who were qualified to enter the palace of the illusory god were actually very few. But this didn't stop the cultivators from all over the palace of the illusory god from heading there. This kind of opportunity only came once every 10,000 years. Even if they couldn't participate, just looking at it from afar might be able to greatly improve their cultivation. As such, all of the cultivators present continued onward without hesitation. Chu Liyue's steps were light and slow, neither fast nor slow. On the one hand, she wasn't in a hurry. On the other hand, she was still recovering her strength. The surrounding heaven and earth energy surged into her body silently, nourishing every inch of her flesh, blood, tendons, and bones. But the 3 parts of the zither score still showed no signs of merging. Behind her, Mu Hongyu and the others followed. On the way, they met many people who were obviously heading towards the palace of the illusory god. All kinds of gazes fell on Chu Liyue and the others. Envy, jealousy, respect, unease. Everyone knew that not only Chu Liyue herself, but also the people around her, had obtained the qualification to enter the palace of the illusory god. How could they not think? At first, no one took her and the people around her who didn't have bloodline power seriously. But now, Chu Liyue turned a blind eye to these gazes and just calmly walked forward. They quickly arrived at the gate of the palace of the illusory god. At this time, the 5th divine envoy, Ruan Jianfeng, was guarding the gate. The originally tightly shut door was now wide open. Many people had already gathered in front of the gate. Seeing Chu Liyue and the others arrive, the crowd automatically parted to make a path. Chu Liyue stepped in. Mu Hongyu followed behind her. The rest of the people stayed behind. Watching Chu Liyue and Mu Hongyu walk in, little Hachi crossed her arms and sighed. "Sigh, I also want to go in." "Me too." "And in me." 2 voices sounded at the same time. Little Hachi stared blankly at Aunt 11 and Aunt 12, who were standing side by side behind her. At this moment, the 2 girls were staring at the illusory god palace in front of them. If it wasn't for Ruan Jianfeng guarding the door, the 2 of them would have already rushed in. Little Hachi's mouth twitched. She was just casually saying it to express her sincerity. But these 2, why did it seem like they really wanted to go in? She looked in the direction of their gazes. The door was wide open. Walking straight ahead was the holy jade of primal chaos, and the white jade pillars that surrounded it. The primal chaos holy jade was dark and silent. At the top of the white jade pillar, a flame burned brightly. This doesn't seem to be wrong? That's the sacred primal chaos jade. Aunt 11 stared straight ahead. Her tone was very certain. Little Hachi blinked. "Yes, what's wrong?" Aunt 11 didn't say anything else. Little Hachi was helpless and turned to look at Aunt 12. "I said," looking at Aunt 12, who was holding her heart with her hands. Her cheeks flushed red with yearning and envy. Little Hachi tactfully swallowed the rest of her words. Good. They were indeed twins. When faced with such a situation, their reactions were exactly the same. Well, Aunt 12 seemed to be more excited. But what's so good about the holy jade of primal chaos? Little Hachi's beautiful eyes turned. She leaned closer and asked in a low voice, Sister 11, Sister 12. What are you looking at? Can you tell Sister 8? Aunt 11 raised her hand. The holy jade of primal chaos is missing a piece. Aunt 12 nodded vigorously. Yes, it's missing a big piece. Little Hachi. I know so. Could it be that they didn't know that their master had the armillary shield? That's impossible. I've been talking to them for a while now. Logically speaking, I should have said everything I could say. She looked in that direction blankly for a few more times. But it was to no avail. After hesitating for a while, little Hachi decided to give up. She couldn't figure it out. She should just wait and see. Aunt 12 gently pulled Aunt 11's sleeve and asked softly, Elder sister, do you think we can defeat the fifth divine emissary? Little Hachi. Aunt 11 calmly shook her head. No. Aunt 12's eyes were filled with disappointment. Then it seems that we can't go in. Aunt 11 suddenly took out 2 jade bottles and handed one to Aunt 12. Fill your stomach first. Only then would you have the strength to fight. Although she didn't say the second half of the sentence, Aunt 12 instantly understood and immediately took the bottle. Little Hachi's eyelids twitched violently. The two of you, are you planning to fight the fifth messenger? 12th lady choked and swallowed a pill with difficulty. Her face was flushed red. What if? Master said that we can't let our guard down at any time. Little Hachi glanced at her faintly. So this is what she's learned from following her master? Don't think that I can't tell that the two of you are trying to force your way in. With her thoughts exposed, Aunt 12 looked at Aunt 11 for help. Aunt 11 was very calm. Not for the time being, we're not strong enough. Little Hachi. She didn't seem to be on the same frequency as these two. Did this mean that as long as they were strong enough, they would really have to fight? After thinking about it carefully, little Hachi decided to fulfill her duty as Sister 8. You're still young. Don't think about fighting and killing all day. How can you solve problems with violence when you encounter them? The two girls looked over at her together. Little Hachi said earnestly, when Master ascends to the heavens and becomes a god, maybe he can make an exception and bring us in, right? If it doesn't work, there's still 7th brother. Little Hongyu is also not bad. Oh, there's still Mr. Su and Senior Shangguan. Something will happen. Aunt 11 held her breath and nodded seriously. 8th sister, you're right. A shy smile appeared on Aunt 12's face. Then, does this mean that we just have to wait here? Little Hachi nodded elegantly. Of course. Chapter 24-24. More and more people gathered outside the gate of the illusory god palace. No one knew that the courtyard, which was bustling with noise and excitement just now, had already quieted down. A few figures quietly left. After Chu Luiyue entered, she quickly met Su Li and Shangguan Jing, who came to welcome her. Little you're finally here. Su Li quickly stepped forward. I was worried that you would be delayed because of the chess game with the saint. Chu Luiyue smiled and raised her gaze, looking in the direction of the main hall of the illusory god palace. There on the 9th step, a familiar figure was quietly standing there. Beside him, there was a huge bronze bell. Obviously, the sound of the bell just now came from there. She slowly said, the first divine envoy personally came out to ring the bell and close the door. Such a big movement. There should be no one in the entire illusory god palace who doesn't know about it, right? Why would there be a delay? Shangguan Jing looked at her with a complicated expression. He wanted to say something, but in the end he swallowed his words. After hearing the bell, he came out to take a look and saw that the first divine envoy was originally, he didn't dare to believe it. But looking at Chu Luiyue's reaction, there was no doubt. Moreover, she seemed to have known about it long ago. Su Li noticed that there was something wrong with her expression and attitude. It was a little strange. Little what happened to you? She followed Chu Luiyue's gaze. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the way Chu Luiyue looked at the first divine envoy was as if she was looking at a very familiar person. She paused and said hesitantly, You know the first divine envoy? Su Li had never seen Mu Qinghe before, so she didn't know much about Chu Luiyue's past in Tianling. Naturally, she didn't understand the current situation. Chu Luyue gently raised the corner of her lips and said, "How could it be? That's the first divine envoy." Sheng Guanjing sighed softly. Su Li's gaze moved between the two of them, and she was a little confused. At this moment, a casual voice with a smile sounded. "Little Yuer, you're finally willing to come?" Chu Liyue's gaze shifted slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened. Senior Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran's hands were behind his head, and there was a toothpick in his mouth. His whole body was filled with indifference and laziness. He didn't look like someone who had lived for tens of thousands of years. Instead, he still looked like a teenager. When he heard how Chu Luyue addressed him, he snorted and teased him. "I really don't dare to be called senior now. I should be the one calling you master." If it wasn't for Chu Luyue's advice, he would still be standing outside, bemoaning his inadequacy. How could he enter the illusory shrine? Chu Luyue knew he was joking, so he only laughed. "You're flattering me." Xiao Ran looked at her from head to toe. Suddenly, his expression changed. The aura on your body seems to be somewhat different from before?" He couldn't tell what was different, but if he looked closely he could see it. Chu Liyue's smile didn't change. "The gate of heaven is closed, and many cultivators are about to ascend to the heavens and become gods. There is only one chance, so I naturally have to make more preparations." Xiao Ran touched his chin. That's true. Although it had always been said that cultivators without bloodline totems would never be able to ascend to the heavens and become gods. But for some reason, he felt that Chu Luyue had this hope. Maybe it was because she had done too many shocking things in the year she had been in the illusory god palace. Back then, everyone thought that she would be forced to leave after staying here for a month. But in the end, not only did she stay until now, but she also openly entered the illusory shrine. Most of the people outside had bloodline totems, but in the end, they were still watching from the outside. So now Xiao Ran was very suspicious of this matter. He even secretly felt that Chu Luyue might really be able to ascend to the heavens and become a god this time. "Hey, I just heard you guys talking about the first divine envoy." Xiao Ran looked towards the main hall of the illusory god palace and clicked his tongue. The first divine envoy hasn't shown his face for many years. Only such a big matter can invite him. At this moment, several figures appeared one after another at the bottom of the 9 steps of the main hall of the illusory god palace. Chu Luyue narrowed her eyes slightly. She was familiar with most of them. "The other divine envoys have also arrived," she said softly. Xiao Ran nodded. "Yes, according to the usual practice, all the divine envoys have to come." As far as the eye could see, Yu Qian and Jin Yunlai had already arrived. Xu Jing and Mu Dongyu were also behind them. There was also one more person that Chu Luyue hadn't seen before. "Who is that?" she asked. Xiao Ran took a closer look. "You mean the person next to the second divine envoy? That's the third divine envoy, Fan Yunxiao." Chu Luyue said, "I don't think I've heard of this person before." The third divine envoy usually stays in the illusory god palace and is mainly responsible for the flow of water and accounts. It's normal that you haven't seen her before. Chu Luyue raised her eyebrows slightly. "So that's what the third divine envoy does. It's really interesting." Xiao Ran looked at her strangely. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong? Nothing. I just suddenly thought of someone." Chu Luyue thought of someone's chubby face. "Our third divine envoy also likes to read accounts. It's just that I haven't seen him for a long time. I wonder how Sanson and the others are doing in the Peach Blossom dock." Xiao Ran nodded in understanding and laughed. "I see, but it's not strange." The 13 divine envoys of the illusory god palace have their own duties. The third divine envoy. Chu Liyue's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She suddenly looked up. "What did you say? The illusory god palace has 13 divine envoys?" Chapter 24-25. Her reaction made Xiao Ran feel strange. "Yeah, didn't I mention it to you before?" He scratched his head. "Oh, it's mainly because everyone in the illusion god palace knows about it, so I might have forgotten to tell you." "Why? Is there something wrong?" Chu Luyue frowned slightly, but her heart was in turmoil. She knew that there were several god envoys in the illusion god palace, each with different duties, but she never thought that there would be 13 of them. How could it be so coincidental? Her 13 guard, also 13 of them. Something flashed across Chu Liyue's mind. She wanted to grab hold of it, but it was too late when she reacted. No, nothing, she murmured and shook her head. She lowered her eyes slightly, hiding the emotions in her eyes. How could it be? Maybe she was thinking too much. The 13 guard had been with her since she was young. They had accompanied her for more than 10 years. During this period, they had experienced many things together, even crossing life and death. No one knew the 13 guard better than her. But the 13 god envoys of the illusion god palace were powerful existences that had been here for more than 10,000 years. The difference was like heaven and earth. It should be a coincidence. Xiao Ran reached out and waved his hand in front of her eyes. Are you really okay? She didn't look like one at all. Chu Liyue looked up. Her expression had returned to normal, and she smiled faintly. I'm really fine. I just remembered that the 13 guard following me is also 13 people. So I thought it was a bit coincidental. Oh, is that so? Xiao Ran finally understood. That's true. But it seems that not all of your subordinates are here? Chu Liyue nodded. A few of them stayed at home. Peach Blossom Cove was indeed her home to a certain extent. I see. But it's a bit of a pity, Xiao Ran said with interest. I saw that the few of them that came to the Illusion God Palace are all very talented and have excellent performances. Not to mention others. Just that Qi Han alone comprehended all the Xian formations on the Star Passage not long after him, and successfully entered the Illusion God Palace. When Xiao Ran heard about this, his heart was filled with jealousy. It was one thing for Chu Liyue to be a pervert, but even his subordinates were so savage. If he remembered correctly, Qi Han had only been in the Illusory God Palace for a month, compared to him, who had spent 10,000 years to finally understand the final profound formation under Chu Liyue's unintentional guidance. The other party had won far too easily. Besides Qi Han, her remaining subordinates were not to be underestimated either, even if they didn't have a bloodline totem. Therefore, Xiao Ran's praise was sincere. Chu Liyue's lips curved up. They are indeed very outstanding. The first divine envoy rang the bell and closed the door. The remaining divine envoys were also summoned and gathered at the plaza in front of the Illusory God Palace. Looking at the figure standing at the top of the 9 steps, the divine envoys bowed respectfully when they arrived. Greetings, First Oracle. Mu Qinghe's expression was indifferent and calm. She stood with her hands behind her back. The other divine envoys weren't surprised by her reaction. The First Oracle's status had transcended, and she was the strongest person under the Divine Master. Naturally, she was different from them. However, a few people looked at the Yuqian without batting an eyelid. All these years, the First Oracle had been in seclusion. Almost all the matters of the Illusory God Palace were handled by the Second Oracle. Many people secretly guessed that the Divine Master had given him power on purpose. It was also because of this that the Yuqian's reputation and power had been rising all these years. Many people treated him no differently from the First Oracle, who knew that when the Heavenly Gate was about to close, the First Oracle would suddenly make a move. He didn't even leave the courtyard, and taught the Yuqian a great lesson. He made him kneel outside the door for 3 days and 3 nights. This slap was loud and clear. Although the people outside didn't know, the people in the Illusory God Palace were very clear about it. Who wouldn't be shocked? With this kneel, all the hard work the Yuqian had done for the past few years was scattered. It also destroyed the fame and power he had painstakingly built up. The Second Oracle couldn't surpass the First Oracle after all. This made many people who were eager to make a move suppress their restless thoughts. They didn't dare to have any other thoughts. Even if the First Oracle hadn't appeared for many years, she was still in existence that couldn't be provoked in the Illusory God Palace, except for the Divine Master. The Yuqian naturally noticed the gazes around him. He was a little impatient and frustrated, but he didn't show it on his face. The previous incident had already happened. The only thing he could do now was to try his best to cover it up. However, when he looked at the tall and straight grayish-blue figure above him, He couldn't help but grit his teeth. So many years of hard work. All went down the drain because of one sentence. Let alone the Yu Qian. Even if it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to let it go easily. But Mu Qinghe was the first oracle. She had the divine master behind her. Thinking of this, the Yu Qian retracted his gaze. He looked around and frowned slightly. Why aren't Jiulong and Xian back yet? As soon as he said this, all the oracles quieted down. After a while, Jin Yunlai said, "Didn't the emperor punish them to the illusory god ocean?" Actually, they had all heard about this matter, but they didn't know what exactly was going on. Offend? How did they offend her? The two of them were sent by the first oracle to find the third score. But in the end, they didn't find it. Instead, they came back with their tails between their legs and were punished to the illusory god ocean. No one knew what happened in between. Xu Jing suddenly thought of something. He looked in a certain direction and said indifferently, "Maybe we should ask the Shengguan Yu about this matter?" The fact that the first two scores had recognized her as the owner was now an open secret among the oracles. Because of this, they couldn't do anything to her now. However, they had waited until today. Xu Jing suddenly smiled. The heavenly gate is closed, and all the cultivators have ascended to the heavens and become gods. This time, she should be returning the score to the illusory god palace in its entirety, right? No one said anything, but their expressions showed that they agreed. After all, it belonged to the illusory god palace. How could it always fall into the hands of others? This was the best time to get the music score back. Fan Yunxiao heard this and looked curiously in the direction of his gaze. "Are you talking about that woman in red?" He had never seen Chu Luiyue before. Xu Jing nodded. "Yes." Fan Yunxiao narrowed her eyes. "I'm afraid she won't agree if we ask for it directly, right? After all, it was a supreme treasure. She had been in the illusory god palace for so long and hadn't returned it. Would she be willing this time?" Xu Jing laughed. "It's not up to her." Chapter 24-26. Fan Yunxiao laughed. That's true. During this period of time, Chu Luiyue had become famous in the illusory god palace. She had even completed the star path and entered the illusory god palace. But her status was there for all to see. She had no choice in many things and could only accept them. Forget it. As for the zither score and her matters, the divine master and the first divine envoy will take care of them in the future. We don't have to worry too much. Xu Jing glanced at Fan Yunxiao. Now we have other more important things to do. The so-called more important things were naturally supervising the many cultivators to ascend to the heavens and become gods. Third divine envoy, do you have the list? Fan Yunxiao's expression froze. I do, but it's not all. These words were tactful. Before ascending to the heavens and becoming gods, the divine envoys gathered together in the illusory god palace to have a clear understanding of the overall situation. Who had how many top-notch medicinal herbs in their hands, and whether they could successfully break through to the medical sage realm in the end. Who had the precious materials, and whether they could take the opportunity to refine a sacred artifact. There were also many secret arts and techniques. To a large extent, these contents determined whether a cultivator had the possibility of ascending to the heavens and becoming gods. Even though they couldn't be completely sure, as divine envoys, they had to have some idea of these things. However, looking at Fan Yunxiao, it was obvious that it couldn't be done. Xu Jing's expression changed slightly. Didn't Treasure Pavilion send the account book over? Fan Yunxiao sneered. Send it. I personally went to borrow it, but I was rejected. As soon as these words were said, the expressions of the divine envoys turned ugly. They had to admit that in this aspect, Treasure Pavilion's account book was more complete. But now they refused to lend it to them. If it was someone else, it would be fine. But the person behind Treasure Pavilion, they couldn't afford to offend him. Xu Jing thought for a moment and asked suspiciously, could it be that this is what that person wants? Fan Yunxiao's expression turned cold. Eighth Divine Envoy, be careful with your words. Xu Jing suddenly came to his senses. He pursed his lips and swallowed the rest of his words. At this moment Yu Qian said calmly, "That doesn't matter. Today everyone would be gathered here. Everything was predestined." More and more cultivators appeared in the square in front of the main hall of the illusory palace. At this moment the door was wide open. Although the people outside couldn't come in, they could still get a general view. Countless gazes were focused on the people in the illusory shrine. Of course, what they saw the most was the first divine envoy, who was standing on the steps. After all, he was the most mysterious one. Suddenly, that person raised his head and looked outside the door. His gaze seemed to have passed through the star path and looked at the tightly shut heavenly gate. However, as he moved, the crowd could finally see his face clearly. Is that the first oracle? Standing on top of the 9 steps with a bronze bell hanging beside him. Who else could it be other than the first divine envoy? He seems to be quite young. I heard that he is much stronger than the second divine envoy. After all, he is someone who is highly regarded by the divine master. Naturally, he is different. Outside the door, the crowd was discussing. Behind the crowd, there was one person who was looking at the high figure with a complicated expression. "It's really him," Jian Fengqi murmured in a low voice. Although Mu Hongyu had told him about this before, when he saw it with his own eyes, it was still for a moment. He didn't know how to describe his feelings. From a distance, he couldn't see very clearly. But that was Mu Qinghe. Jian Fengqi had been friends with him for more than 10 years. How could he not recognize her? But that person, after all, was completely different from the person in his memory. Mu Qinghe? Little Hachi, who was planning to laze around and wait, looked up unintentionally. When she saw that familiar face, she was shocked on the spot. Her mind went blank for a moment. Then, she turned her neck stiffly and looked at Jian Fengqi with difficulty. That person. Am I seeing things? Jian Fengqi closed his eyes and didn't say anything. But this answer was enough. Little Hachi opened her mouth, and her mind was in a mess. Madame 12, who was standing at the side, also saw this scene. She was stunned and subconsciously raised her finger. Isn't that Brother Qinghe? Madame 11 frowned and pressed her hand down. He's not. Madame 12 turned around and saw that Madame 11 was also staring at that person. That expression. Madame 12 was conflicted for a while, but she couldn't help but say, Sister, that's Brother Qinghe. How could they not recognize this face? Madame 11 pursed her lips and looked at little Hachi. Sister 8, he's not right? Her voice, which had always been crisp and clear, was now slightly hoarse for some reason. Who was Mu Qinghe? He was someone who had followed Master for many years, just like the 13 Yu guards. In fact, compared to the 13 Yu guards, Master had spent more time with him and was more attentive. Mu Qinghe was in the light, while the 13 Yu guards were in the dark. Everyone had their own duties. In the past, Madame 11 and Madame 12 often went to play with Hong Yao and Dumpling, so they were closer to Mu Qinghe. At that time, Dumpling even called him Little 9. But later, he and the 13 Yu guards parted ways. Although no one had said it explicitly, Madame 11 and Madame 12 knew some things, including Mu Qinghe's betrayal and his death. But now, he actually appeared just like that. And he was the first oracle. Little Hachi was also stunned. She stuttered, which was rare. I should. It's him. Jian Fengqi pressed between his eyebrows, feeling a headache. Only Chu Luyue and Mu Hongyu knew about this before. After the two of them returned, Mu Hongyu specifically looked for Jian Fengqi to question him. Jian Fengqi only found out then. But other than that, no one else knew about this. Little Hachi and the others had such a big reaction, so it was understandable. It's him, but it's also not him. Jian Fengqi sighed. They were all stunned on the spot. There was too much information. I'm going to ask him myself. Madame 12 suddenly turned around and ran over. Chapter 24-27. Aunt 11 knew something was wrong and wanted to pull her back, but she was too late. In the blink of an eye, Aunt 12 had run quite a distance away. Little Hachi's heart skipped a beat. What is she doing? Stop her. What was this place? How dangerous was it for Aunt 12 to run over like that? Before she could finish her sentence, Aunt 11 stomped her feet and ran over. Catch up to her. Little Hachi was very anxious and quickly followed after her with Jian Fengqi. Even though Xiao Ba and Jian Fengqi weren't very strict and proper people normally, the two of them were very clear-headed and knew what they could and couldn't do. Even if they were really confused about Mu Qinghe, they could not go over at this time. However, there were too many people around, and the two girls were running too fast. Jian Fengqi and Little Hachi could not catch up. Aunt 12 ran out of the crowd and went straight to the gate of the palace of the illusory god. When everyone saw this scene, they were all taken aback. What was going on? Was she trying to break into the palace of the illusory god? Ruan Jianfeng, who was guarding the gate, also saw this scene. His face darkened, and he waved his sword to stop her. Whoosh! The bright light of the sword cut through the air and blocked in front of Aunt 12 instantly. The biting cold air was very oppressive. Who are you? How dare you break into the palace of the illusory god? Aunt 12 did not stop and was about to hit the sword. It looked like she was really looking for death. Some of the onlookers could not help but frown. How could a good little girl be so stubborn? Crack! The crisp sound of a sharp weapon breaking was heard. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. They almost thought that they were hallucinating. That little girl, with just a light twist of her little hand, broke the fifth divine emissary's sword. Ruan Jianfeng was also stunned. The corner of his eyes twitched when he saw 12 Madam simply throw the broken sword to the ground. Where did this come from? Seeing that Aunt 12 was about to go in, Ruan Jianfeng immediately stepped forward and shouted, "How dare you!" He personally came forward to stop her, and 12 Nyang had no choice but to stop. She looked up at Ruan Jianfeng. Her face flushed red and her eyes filled with tears. I want to go in." His voice was very soft, but his tone was unusually firm. Ruan Jianfeng's expression was cold. "Do you think the palace of the illusory god is a place where you can enter as you please? If you don't leave quickly, don't blame me for being impolite." Today was a special day, and he didn't want to make a move on this little girl. It was too troublesome. Just as 12th Nyang was about to say something, she was suddenly pulled from behind. She turned around and saw that it was Aunt 11. "Sister, let's go back first." Aunt 11 was exceptionally calm as she held her hand tightly, but 12 Nyang did not want to listen. Her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. She bit her lips and tears fell. "But, sister, don't you want to go and ask? Why are you here? How did he become the first oracle?" Aunt 11 finally started to waver. How could she not want to ask? But, Sister 11, Sister 12, now is not the time to talk about this. Let's go back first. At this time Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi finally rushed over. Although Little Hachi was also very shocked, she was still a few years older than them. The current situation, how could it be explained in a few sentences? 12 Nyang suddenly grabbed her hand, her eyes red. "Sister 8, I want to go and ask. I must go." Unlike Aunt 11, 12 Nyang was usually a soft person. She spoke very little, and her voice was always soft. She had never been angry or quarreled with anyone. When she encountered happy things, she would only cover her mouth and smile. When she encountered sad things, she would only cry silently and secretly, not daring to let others know. This was the first time Little Hachi saw 12 Nyang so determined to do something. She wiped her tears and said, I want to go and ask him, why did he do such a thing to Master? Did he lie to all of us? And Master? Little Hachi felt as if a fishbone was stuck in her throat. The rest of her words could not be said. She raised her eyes and looked inside. That person, is he looking here now? Ruan Jianfeng warned in a low voice. I'll count to 3. If you don't leave by then, I'll take action immediately. Aunt 11 suddenly raised her eyes and looked at him coldly. We have something to ask Mu Qinghe. Who do you think you are? Ruan Jianfeng did not have time to get angry about the second half of the sentence. His attention was all on the first half of the sentence. How dare you? His face immediately turned cold. When the surrounding people heard Aunt 11's words, they instantly went into an uproar. What did she say? Who is she going to ask? It seems to be the first oracle? Is she looking for death? Not only did she call the first oracle by his name, but she also used such an interrogative tone. I think these people have all gone crazy. Jian Fengqi was very anxious. I said, let's go back first. I'll explain it to you in detail later. Before he could finish, an indifferent and low voice suddenly came from the palace of the illusory god. Jianfeng, is this how you guard the door? They were all stunned. This voice was very familiar. This tone was unfamiliar. Wan Jianfeng's heart skipped a beat. He immediately turned around and said, reporting to the first oracle, these people said they want to see you. I won't see them. Mu Qinghe's voice was extremely cold. If anyone tries to force their way into the palace of the illusory god, kill them on the spot. Hearing this, everyone quieted down. Inside and outside the palace of the illusory god, there was a dead silence. Chu Luiyue looked down at the ground in front of him and suddenly smiled. Chapter 24-28. Then she walked towards the door. You are, Sheng Guanjing said worriedly. However, when he saw the calm expression on her face, he suddenly did not know what to say. She should have known. Therefore, when Mu Qinghe said such words, her reaction was also calm and indifferent. He stopped in his tracks and did not follow. Instead, he looked back at Mu Qinghe. Su Li and Xiao Ran both realized that something was wrong and looked at each other. Outside the door, tears fell from the corners of Aunt Twelve's eyes. Then she suddenly could not cry anymore. Only a chill was left, rising from the soles of her feet, making her feel cold all over. Aunt 11 took half a step forward and stood in front of Aunt 12. Wan Jianfeng looked at them coldly. Did you all hear what the first oracle said? You don't need to remind me. Aunt 11 did not show any weakness. There was a ball of fire in her heart, and she did not know how to vent it. You! A fierce look flashed across Wan Jianfeng's eyes. Just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly heard a laughing voice behind him. Fifth oracle. He paused and looked back. Subconsciously he frowned. Sheng Guanyu. Did he see that his subordinates were in trouble and could not sit still? Chu Luiyue seemed to have seen through his thoughts. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, and he smiled casually. Our Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 are still young. They made a mistake on impulse, but it was purely unintentional. Fifth oracle, you won't really hold it against them, right? When he said this, Wan Jianfeng suddenly choked. He looked at the two girls standing together, and then looked at the broken sword that was thrown on the ground. For a moment he fell into silence. She did indeed look like a weak and delicate little girl. However, her combat strength had nothing to do with this word. Since Chu Luiyue had said so, he could not continue to hold on to it. However, if he really let it go, it would be a little embarrassing. He thought for a moment and only sneered coldly. These people are extremely presumptuous. They offended the first oracle. How can we let it go just like that? Chu Luiyue smiled. They just mistook the first divine emissary for an old friend. These words sounded a little strange. Mistaken? Old friend? What was the identity of the first oracle? How muddle-headed were they to mistake him? Moreover, that little girl had clearly called out the name of the first oracle. It didn't seem like a mistake. Calling the first oracle by his name is wrong. Even if he is wrong, shouldn't the first oracle be the one to judge and punish him? When Chu Luiyue said this, he turned around and looked at the man standing on top. First divine envoy, are you going to kill them on the spot? There was a smile on her lips as she asked in a casual manner. However, that pair of clear and bright eyes were suffused with a sharp and cold light. When it landed on one's body, it almost caused one to feel a faint pain. Mu Qinghe had one hand behind her back. The expression on her face was unfathomable. Everyone waited quietly, and the air seemed to have frozen at this moment. After a while, he finally heard the monotonous voice. There won't be a next time. Wan Jianfeng opened his mouth, but in the end, he respectfully responded. Yes. The first oracle had always been decisive and ruthless. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stay in this position for tens of thousands of years. Even if he hadn't come out of seclusion in recent years, he could still suppress the second oracle. This kind of temperament and courage was not something an ordinary person could compare to. Wang Jianfeng originally thought that the first oracle would give an extremely severe punishment as a warning, but he didn't expect that. He would just let it go. Probably because he didn't want to waste time and energy on these trivial matters. After all, the highlight of today's show was still in the palace of the illusory god. If he were to argue with the two little girls at this time, it would indeed seem like he wasn't magnanimous enough. With this thought, Wang Jianfeng gradually dispelled the doubts in his heart. Chu Luyue looked at 12 Madam, and the frost between her eyebrows faded away. Okay, 12 Madam, don't cry. 12 Madam looked at her in a daze. Master already knew? Little Hachi, take them outside and wait. When things are over here, I will go back. Little Hachi hurriedly said. Oh, okay. As she spoke, she pulled the two girls to the back with heartache. Probably because of Chu Luyue's words, the two girls were very cooperative this time. They quickly retreated to the back of the crowd. Jian Fengqi breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at Mu Qinghe in the distance, and then looked at Chu Luyue. After a moment, he finally let out a long sigh. Don't worry, I will take good care of them. Chu Luyue's lips curled up slightly. Thank you. Jian Fengqi hesitantly opened his mouth. You. After thinking for a long time, he finally swallowed the rest of his words. The scene in front of him was better than any words, and there was really nothing to say. He turned and followed little Hachi and the others. Chu Luyue went back. Seeing her return, Su Li pulled her with one hand and patted her chest lightly with the other. Little you are too bold. You actually went over like this. Fortunately, nothing happened. She was really worried that the first god's emissary would not let this matter go, and even vent his anger on Chu Luyue. After all, even the second god's emissary knelt outside his door for 3 whole days, let alone others. He was definitely not a person to be trifled with. Chu Luyue's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Her red lips curled up slightly, and she tilted her head and laughed. The first god's emissary is broad-minded and kind-hearted. What is there to worry about? Su Li's eyelids twitched. These words, it obviously sounded like a compliment, but why did she hear a trace of bone-chilling coldness in them? Little Hachi pulled Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 to an open space behind the crowd. Looking at Aunt 12 crying until her eyes and nose were red, she sighed and took out a handkerchief to wipe the tears on her face. Okay, our Aunt 12 is the most obedient, don't cry. Aunt 12 shook her head, bit her lip, and said, Sister 8, I'm not crying anymore. Ever since she heard Mu Qinghe's words, she was so cold that she could not shed any tears. Aunt 11 was fine. She did not cry, but her expression, clearly, she had not completely recovered from the impact of this matter. Aunt 12 paused and asked, Sister 8, Master said we have the wrong person. Yes, we have the wrong person. Without waiting for little Hachi to speak, Aunt 11 suddenly said firmly, he is the first god's emissary, not Brother Qinghe. As time passed, more cultivators appeared in the palace of the illusory god. Soon, a familiar figure came into view. Seeing the person, Chu Luyue raised her eyebrows slightly and took the initiative to greet him. Master Nan, long time no see. How have you been? Nan Jinshu, who wanted to pretend that he did not see and pass by quietly, suddenly froze. He slowly raised his head and looked over, revealing an extremely awkward smile. Chapter 24-29. His smile was uglier than his crying face. It was obvious that Chu Luyue had traumatized him. Nan Jinshu had seen Chu Luyue from afar when he arrived. He couldn't help it. Some people would easily stand out no matter where they went. Besides, Nan Jinshu was really afraid of her. After learning his lesson last time, Nan Jinshu had learned his lesson. He didn't confront Chu Luyue head-on anymore, and avoided her whenever he could. Chu Luyue hadn't been in the palace of the illusory god recently, so he was able to relax for a while. However, he couldn't avoid today's situation. Everyone in the palace of the illusory god had gathered here, let alone the palace of the illusory god. He had no choice but to come. Chu Luyue glanced at Nan Jinshu. It seems that Patriarch Nan hasn't made any breakthroughs recently. Nan Jinshu's expression darkened. She still had the nerve to say that. If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have been chased out of the illusory god ocean. Great. She had made a breakthrough and entered the palace of the illusory god. What about him? Even though he had the right to stand here and be envied by many cultivators, it would be extremely difficult for him to ascend to the heavens and become a divinity. He took a deep breath and said, You don't have to worry about that. If you have the time and energy to do that, I think you should worry about yourself more. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Nan Jinshu was still thinking about the bloodline totem, even at a time like this. Well, it made sense. There were probably many people who had the same thoughts as him. Patriarch Nan, why are you being so formal? I have a good relationship with the Nan family. It's only right for me to show my concern. Nan Jinshu's mouth twitched when he heard that. He almost couldn't stop himself from cursing out loud. At this moment, he caught a glimpse of Jun Jiuqing coming from the side. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Family E. Chu Luiyue looked over when he heard that. It was Jun Jiuqing. After not seeing him for a while, Jun Jiuqing's aura was clearly much stronger than before. When Chu Luiyue looked at him, he seemed to sense it and looked over as well. With just a glance, he seemed to have noticed something, and his eyes flashed. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled slightly. Jun Jiuqing. What did he see? However, he didn't say anything and didn't even look at Chu Luiyue. It looks like everything is normal. But this was what made Chu Luiyue feel the most strange. Ever since Jun Jiuqing came to the illusory god palace, his words and actions had been strange. But she couldn't pinpoint exactly what the problem was. Jun Jiuqing came to a spot not far from Nan Jinshu. Nan Jinshu instantly felt more at ease. He looked at Jun Jiuqing and said enviously, Jun Jiuqing, you're a genius. Looks like family E is going to ascend to the heavens this time. This aura is indeed extraordinary. Jun Jiuqing's lips curled into a devilish smile. It's hard to say for now. How can that be? If it were anyone else, that would be the case. But family E is extremely talented and has a bloodline totem, so he's naturally much better than anyone else. Nan Jinshu knew that the person he had the most hope of winning over was Jun Jiuqing, so he quickly expressed his opinion. Even though the two of them had obtained special qualifications to enter the illusory god palace, he was still inferior to Jun Jiuqing due to various reasons. So even if he lowered his head and tried to curry favor, he wouldn't feel that it was beneath him. Besides, Jun Jiuqing was much stronger than him, and the target of his derogatory words was naturally Chu Luiyue and the others. Jun Jiuqing didn't comment. Nan Jinshu couldn't guess his thoughts, so for safety's sake he quieted down. In the illusory god palace, other than the god envoys who had already gathered here, there weren't many people left. Including Chu Luiyue and the others, there were no more than 20 people left. At this moment Mu Qinghe, who was standing on the stairs, suddenly made his move. A ray of light flew out from his palm. Immediately after, the ray of light split into 4 bright rays of light in the air and landed around the Chaos Holy Jade, forming 4 huge silver Xian formations. These Xian formations were extremely complicated, and their auras were heavy. Everyone's gazes landed on it. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled slightly. Even though there was still a distance between them, she could already feel the strong aura that couldn't be ignored. Just from this point alone, Mu Qinghe's strength was definitely much stronger than Yu Qian's. She exhaled softly. The first god envoy, as expected of him. Mu Qinghe said in a low voice. These 4 Xian formations are the 4 competition areas. They are divided into weapon refiners, Xian masters, celestial physician, and martial artists. Now, all cultivators outside the illusory god palace can choose a competition area to compete in. As long as they can pass the test, they can also stay in the illusory god palace. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but be stunned when she heard this. What does this mean? Other people can still enter? Yes. Xiao Ran nodded and explained in a low voice. This test is the last chance for the cultivators outside to enter the illusory god palace. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. If that's the case, why did we set so many strict requirements before? Couldn't everyone just wait for this opportunity? Sai, you don't know. This test is also called the life and death test. Those who choose to enter and challenge either stay in the illusory god palace alive or die. Once you enter, it means that you're gambling with your life. Naturally, it's different from us. Xiao Ran shook his head. The life and death test has a 90% chance of survival, and only a few people can survive. Chapter 2430. Chu Luiyue understood. No wonder. As a cultivator, who didn't want to enter the palace of the illusory god and become a god? But those who could succeed were few and far between. And if they failed, they would have to pay with their lives. If they didn't have enough confidence in themselves, they wouldn't make such a choice easily. After all, no matter how precious other things were, they couldn't compare to their own lives. As long as they were alive, there was still hope. If they were dead, it would be the end of everything. Chu Luiyue glanced at Xiao Ran. So, Senior Xiao Ran hasn't entered the life and death trial before? Of course not. Xiao Ran bit the toothpick with a natural expression. It's better to live than to die. I'd rather wait another 10,000 years than stretch my neck out and be slaughtered by others. Chu Luiyue. If someone like you isn't willing to enter the life and death trial, then the others. Sigh, you're wrong. Xiao Ran laughed and raised his chin. There are many people in the palace of the illusory god who are willing to fight with their lives. Just watch, there will be many people coming in later. Chu Luiyue looked up. Sure enough, outside the door, a young man took the lead and stood out. Feng Su is willing to fight in the venerable zone. This man looked to be about 30 years old. He had a strong body and a bronze face. His eyes were full of fighting spirit. See, this is the one who's willing to fight. Xiao Ran said in a low voice. TSK. If it's someone else, they'll have a chance to enter the palace of the illusory god early. But martial artists can't. These venerable gods, no matter how strong or weak they are, only have one choice in the end. If they don't choose, they won't have any chance at all. Was it cruel? Of course. But this was the rule of the palace of the illusory god. The strong were respected. This was the most irrefutable principle here. But this Feng Sining is quite strong. I think he'll succeed. Chu Luiyue listened and didn't say anything. Those who dared to take the lead had to have some ability. At this time, Wan Jianfeng had let him in. Enter. Feng Sining took a deep breath, tidied his clothes, and stepped into the palace of the illusory god. He walked straight, and quickly arrived at one of the profound formations. A faint glow shone, and a powerful aura pressed down on his chest. Feng Sining's heart trembled as he cupped his fists and bowed. Your Eminence, Feng Sining, please accept my challenge. Upon hearing this, Chu Luiyue was stunned. You want to challenge the fourth oracle? Xiao Ran moved closer and explained in a low voice. There's something you don't know. The so-called life and death trial is a trial where cultivators choose a divine emissary based on their region of competition to duel. Doesn't that mean he'll lose for sure? Not necessarily. After entering the competition area, the strength of the divine emissary would be suppressed to the same level as the challenger. In this way, the challenger's chances of winning will increase by a lot. As long as he can win, he will pass this stage. Xiao Ran pointed at the fourth divine envoy. Furthermore, the divine envoy wasn't chosen randomly. Feng Sining is a god, so he wouldn't challenge a mystic cultivator like the seventh divine emissary, right? Chu Luiyue understood. I see. These divine envoys each had their own duties, and they were good at different fields. If a cultivator wanted to pass the life and death trial, there were only a few choices. However, Feng Sining's guts are really big. He actually chose the fourth divine emissary directly. He's used to the lightning pool for many years. Although the fourth divine envoy couldn't completely control the lightning pool, everyone thought it was an accident. After all, even the second divine envoy and the others had to work together to suppress the lightning pool. Therefore, in the eyes of the people of the illusion god palace, Mu Dongyu was still very strong. Chu Luiyue nodded. Hearing this, Mu Dongyu did not seem to be surprised. She flew up and landed on the profound formation. He sized Feng Sining up and smiled. You're quite brave. It was indeed good to be the first one to step forward. Mu Dongyu had always appreciated such a person. Feng Sining's heart beat violently as he cupped his fists. Fourth divine envoy, please enlighten me. Then, He spread his legs slightly, tensed his muscles and surged his divine power. An astonishing aura instantly exploded. Upon seeing this scene, Chu Luyue narrowed her eyes slightly. This Fong Sining was indeed a top existence among the gods. He just didn't know if he could beat Mu Dongyu in this round. In the next moment, Fong Sining's figure suddenly disappeared. Mu Dongyu's expression turned serious, and he immediately attacked. As if he had eyes on the back of his head, he turned around and threw out a palm without hesitation. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. The two's fists collided. This was their first move. Fong Sining clearly didn't hold back and used his full strength. It was indeed the only way to fight an expert like Mu Dongyu head-on. There might be some hope if he finished the battle quickly, but the longer he dragged it out, the more disadvantageous it would be for the challenger. After all, although their realms were suppressed to the same level as a divine envoy, Mu Dongyu's strength was still stored up. The longer he endured, the harder it would be. Fong Sining also understood this, so he used a killing move from the start. Astonishing energy fluctuations spread out in all directions with the two as the center. However, when the violent energy reached the edge of the arena, it seemed to have encountered an invisible barrier that quietly devoured and annihilated it. All the confrontations and killings were firmly trapped in that region. After a moment of stalemate, blood slowly flowed out of the corner of Fong Sining's mouth. Obviously, Mu Dongyu wasn't that easy to deal with. She was the fourth divine envoy after all. I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult for him to win this round. Even if he wins, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory. Chu Luyue whispered. An intense battle was unavoidable. So what if it's a Pyrrhic victory? As long as he can ascend to the heavens and become a god, the price is actually nothing. Xiao Ran seemed to be used to this. Oh, by the way, I remember that some time ago, you had a kid who also became a god. Chu Luyue was stunned. You mean little Zhou? Yes. He didn't come? Xiao Ran glanced outside the door. Although the young man with soft, short golden hair was taciturn, he was extremely talented and strong. Chu Luyue thought for a moment. Indeed, she hadn't seen little Zhou much recently. However, even if he came, she didn't agree to let him enter this life and death stage. He just became a god not long ago, so his chances of winning are probably not high, she said with a smile. Xiao Ran thought about it and agreed. He rubbed his chin. Hey, other than him, don't you have a few subordinates who are also quite strong? Sini. Sini. Is that his name? He didn't come either? Chapter 2431. Xiao Ran was very good at reading people. Although he hadn't seen Sini many times, he was certain that he was definitely not ordinary. If he came, he might really succeed. But now he didn't see anyone. This was a little strange. He seems to be the boss of your subordinates. He actually didn't come on such an important day. Xiao Ran was very surprised. Chu Luyue was also stunned. It was fine if she didn't think of it before. But now that Xiao Ran said this, it seemed to be true. After she and Rong Xiu finished the game of chess, she came straight over and didn't see Sini. At that time, she casually asked, and little Hachi only said that Sini seemed to be busy. It had been a while, but he still hadn't come over. If he's willing to help, I think. He can also enter the palace of the illusory god, right? Xiao Ran said. He even felt that more than one of Chu Luyue's subordinates could do it. After all, there was already Qi Han. Chu Luyue pondered for a moment and smiled. They always have their own ideas. Supreme Dr. Liang He, please fight. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from outside the door. Many people looked over. A man walked out of the crowd. Chu Luyue took a closer look. It was Liang He. However, the current him had undergone a huge change compared to the past. He had lost a lot of weight and had green stubble. His cheeks were slightly sunken, and his eyes were lifeless. He looked extremely haggard, and didn't have the slightest bit of his former high spirits. One had to know that he was the youngest supreme doctor in the entire illusory god palace. Everyone, including Xu Jing, felt that he was the most likely to successfully enter the palace of the illusory god. Unfortunately, after suffering a series of blows, he had almost lost all his confidence. He was in a daze all day and couldn't improve in alchemy. It had dragged on until now, resulting in its current state. If it wasn't for Mu Qinghe's bell, he wouldn't even know what day it was. After hesitating for a while, Liang He decided to come over. After all, he had put in a lot of effort before, and he was unwilling to give up now. Seeing Liang He arrive, the crowd fell silent for a moment. Wang Jianfeng frowned slightly and glanced at him. Come in. However, Liang He did not enter immediately. Instead, he turned around, as if he was looking for something. In next to no time, he saw the enchanting figure behind the crowd, and his gaze stopped as a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in his eyes. Not far away, Jian Fengqi opened his folding fan with a swish and said with a faint smile, Hey, Liang He is looking at you. Little Hachi raised her eyes and glanced at him. She didn't seem to care. I'm a natural beauty. Isn't it normal for someone to look at me? Jian Fengqi was speechless. Aunt 11 followed his gaze and said expressionlessly, It's useless even if he looks. His looks can't enter Sister 8's eyes. Besides, isn't Sister 8 already married to Sister 8? She had always been objective and fair. Little Hachi almost choked on her saliva. Cough, 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 you guys. Sister, I'm afraid it's not good for us to be so direct. Aunt 12 said hesitantly in a low voice. Aunt 11 asked back, Then tell me, between Sister 8's husband and that man, who's better looking? Aunt 12 answered honestly, Sister 8's husband. Then it's him. She had always been objective and fair. Besides, Sister 8's husband is one of us, and that Liang He is an outsider. We have to speak for our own people. If we don't speak harshly enough, and he thinks there's still hope, then wouldn't we be causing trouble for Sister 8 and Sister 8's husband? Aunt 12 thought about it, and felt that her words made sense. She blushed and admitted her mistake. I understand. Little Hachi was speechless. Jian Fengqi was gloating at the side. After laughing enough, he said, Little Hachi, I'll leave these two girls to you. Little Hachi glared at him. What do you mean? Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows slightly. What else can I do? You want to go to the palace of the illusory god to find little Hongyu. Little 8 looked at his expression, and immediately understood what was going on. Jian Fengqi snorted. If I don't go, what if she gets bullied? Little Hachi looked at him speechlessly. She went to the palace of the illusory god before you did. Even if she gets bullied, you're the one who's easier to bully, right? Jian Fengqi was speechless. He closed his folding fan and turned to leave. Wait! Little Hachi shouted again. Jian Fengqi turned back. What? Little Hachi's red lips curved into a perfect arc. Her smile was charming, and her eyes were pure. Of course, I'm going with you. Liang He was just subconsciously looking around to see if Little Hachi had come here. He didn't expect Little Hachi to suddenly come here with Jian Fengqi. Looking at the approaching figure, his expression changed slightly, and his heart couldn't help but ripple. Feelings couldn't be controlled. Even if he had already given up, when he saw that person, he still, however, Little Hachi didn't look at him. Instead, she walked all the way to the door with a smile. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 didn't follow. They just watched from behind. When Wang Jianfeng saw Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi, his face suddenly turned cold. What do you want now? Wasn't that enough after the fight just now? Jian Fengqi coughed and laughed. It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. This time we're going to enter the life and death trial, of course. Little Hachi interrupted him with a smile. Wang Jianfeng's eyes were suspicious. With just you two? This suspicious and contemptuous look immediately made Little Hachi angry. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and her beautiful eyes seemed to be cold. Why I can't? After all, she and Jian Fengqi were both master doctors. If Liang He could enter, why couldn't they? Wang Jianfeng said coldly. Of course you can. But there's one thing you don't know. Once you enter the life and death trial, there's no chance for regret. Everyone who loses will only have one word. Death. Little Hachi yawned impatiently. I know all this. You don't have to say it twice. If you don't want us to go in, just say it. Wang Jianfeng's chest tightened. He didn't like these people. But since they wanted to die, why should he stop them? Thinking of this, he took half a step back. Little Hachi put her hair behind her back and walked in. Jian Fengqi followed closely behind. Liang He fell behind and became the third. Wan Jianfeng looked at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "There's only one round of the life and death trial of the celestial physician. Those who want to participate can enter now." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a commotion in the crowd. Sure enough, people came forward one after another. Little Hachi stepped into the celestial physician area. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Su Li asked softly, "Little Yuer, why are they here?" "It's too dangerous." Chu Luiyue looked in that direction. Right at this moment, Little Eight sensed her gaze and smiled at her. Under the sun, she was tender and warm like a rose in its best season. Chu Luiyue suddenly relaxed. She smiled and said, "This round we might win." Chapter 2432. She knew the 13th Yu very well. If she wasn't absolutely confident, Little Hachi would never have entered. Although Chu Luiyue wasn't sure where her confidence came from, she believed in Little Hachi. As for Jian Fengqi, Chu Luiyue tilted her head and looked at Mu Hongyu beside her. Mu Hongyu was currently staring at Jian Fengqi with a frown. Realizing that something was wrong, she immediately turned her head with a blank expression. "Luyu, why are you looking at me like that?" Chu Luiyue shook her head and sighed. "Nothing. I just feel that in order to marry a wife, young Master Jian is really putting in a lot of effort. He doesn't even care about his life. TSK. He's really going all out." Mu Hongyu's face instantly turned red. "Don't talk nonsense." Although she said that, her eyes still flashed with worry. This life and death juncture, is it really dangerous? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. "What are you doing for this?" Mu Hongyu mumbled. Chu Luiyue knew that she was indeed worried about Jian Fengqi, so she stopped teasing her and said, "Don't worry. Although Jian Fengqi has just broken through to become a supreme doctor, his talent in this area is amazing. He still has a chance of winning. After all, he was a celestial physician who had grown up after being defeated by her for several years. How could an ordinary person compare to him?" If Jian Fengqi knew what Chu Luiyue was thinking at this moment, he would definitely vomit blood. However, these words still made Mu Hongyu feel a lot more at ease. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The few of them stood still in the celestial physician competition area. Jian Fengqi first glanced at Mu Hongyu. Naturally, he also heard the conversation between her and Chu Luiyue. He immediately curled his lips. A certain someone was still as stubborn and soft-hearted as ever. He whispered, "Little Hachi, just now the 5th oracle said that all the celestial physician will have to go through this round of life and death together. Does that mean that our opponents are the same? Do you even need to ask?" Little Hachi glanced at him. A celestial physician was different from a martial artist. If one wanted to determine the level of a celestial physician, there was no need for a one-on-one duel. All one needed to do was to refine medicine. As long as the pill you refined was of a higher grade and had better medicinal effects, you would naturally win. Then this candidate, Jian Fengqi, suddenly thought of something, and the corner of his eyes twitched violently. This candidate, isn't there no choice? Among the 13 oracles, only the 8th oracle, Xu Jing, was a celestial physician. Little Hachi said faintly, "You didn't just think of this now, did you?" Jian Fengqi was speechless. Just now, he only wanted to come in and see Mu Hongyu. Why would he think so much? Little Hachi smiled brightly. "Oh, isn't he here?" Jian Fengqi looked up and saw Xu Jing walking towards them. His forehead twitched violently, and he suddenly looked at Little Hachi. He lowered his voice and asked, "You did it on purpose?" She must have known that she would have to go up against Xu Jing in this round, so she was so eager to give it a try. She was most likely waiting for this opportunity to have a good fight with Xu Jing. Little Hachi blinked innocently. "How could I? My master is still here. How could I not come?" As for dealing with Xu Jing, it was just a matter of convenience. Jian Fengqi rubbed his face. He had a hunch that today, he was bound to witness a great battle. Xu Jing didn't need anyone to take the initiative to come over. She was in charge of Herb Mountain, so she was naturally the most suitable person to fight in this life and death round. When she reached the top of the competition area, Her gaze calmly swept across little Hachi, Jian Fengqi, and the others and finally landed on Liang He. She shook her head. Liang He, you disappoint me. Liang He immediately looked ashamed. The eighth oracle had indeed treated him well, and had taken care of him a lot. But he didn't cherish it. It's just for a woman. Why do you have to go to this extent? Xu Jing said lightly. As soon as she said this, everyone around them fell silent. Many people subconsciously looked at little Hachi. There was no need to say who the woman in her words was referring to. Other than little Hachi, there was no one else. Although everyone knew that Liang He had failed to pursue little Hachi, Xu Jing's words were undoubtedly hinting that it was because of little Hachi that Liang He had fallen to this state. She was scolding him in a roundabout way. Liang He's face instantly turned a little ugly. Eighth Oracle, I blame myself for this. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Xu Jing shook her head, and a trace of mockery flashed across her eyes. You're still thinking about someone else at this time. Why don't you think about yourself? How did you become like this in just a few months? You're sad and depraved for someone else, but other people don't even want to look at you. Liang He's face turned red and white at the same time. He subconsciously looked at little Hachi and wanted to explain, but the more anxious he was, the more he couldn't say anything. At this moment, little Hachi suddenly sneered. Eighth Oracle, what do you mean? Why don't I understand? Xu Jing lifted her chin slightly. It's okay if others don't understand, but you should know best. Little Hachi crossed her arms and smiled charmingly. It seems that the eighth oracle has a big misunderstanding about me. Since that's the case, I'll take this opportunity to make things clear today. Liang He, tell me, have I done anything wrong to you? No. At the very beginning, this young lady had already told you clearly that this young lady already has someone she likes. It was you who kept on pestering me. I'm magnanimous, and I didn't pursue this matter with you. Why are you still playing the blame game in the end? She shrugged and blinked her eyes innocently. Liang He, eighth oracle, I'm going to clear my name today. Otherwise, if Brother Yin Qing hears this, what if he gets jealous and angry? Chapter 2433. At this moment, little Hachi felt that her idea of getting Yin Qing to help her was simply a genius. She had clearly made things so clear before, but there were still people who pushed the blame to her. Did she look so easy to bully? Now that she had Yin Qing as a shield, it wouldn't be easy for them to slander her. Brother Yin Qing and I are a match made in heaven. Almost everyone in the Illusion God Palace knows this. Why is it that when it comes to you guys, it's this lady who is playing with young Master Liang He's feelings? Little Hachi blinked as she spoke. Don't you guys know that this lady is someone who looks at faces? Puffed. A low chuckle came from the crowd of onlookers. Although it was quickly suppressed, it still caused a lot of people to laugh along with it. Everyone secretly exchanged meaningful glances with each other. Gradually, sounds of discussion could be heard. Yeah, a few days ago, I was at Herb Mountain and saw little Hachi going in and out with a man. Although the distance was a bit far, that man was indeed tall and handsome. He looked like a talent. I saw it too. Although he looked cold, he treated little Hachi extremely well. The two of them walked all the way, and didn't even let go of each other's hands. He seemed to be a god. His talent and strength are indisputable. Really? If that's the case, little Hachi really has no reason to care about Liang He. Tisk, there are so many people who like little Hachi. Who is Liang He? Little Hachi has always treated everyone equally, and rejected all of them. I met her a few times, but I couldn't even get a word in. Liang He wasn't the only one who was rejected. Why is he the only one who was rejected? I think he's the one with the problem. I think so too. If I were her, I would also choose that person. The words of the eighth divine envoy just now were a bit. Everyone was discussing. Chu Liyue's eyes twitched as he listened. Little Hachi and Yin Qing? When did this happen? They even went to the Herb Mountain hand in hand. She thought about this scene seriously, and found it hard to imagine. Yin Qing's icy face. She seemed to have missed something important. Liang He couldn't wait to find a hole to crawl into. He hurriedly explained. Eighth divine envoy, this matter is indeed a misunderstanding. There's really nothing between me and little Hachi. The reason why I've been like this recently is because I've lost a few matches. That's why. But it has nothing to do with little Hachi. He liked little Hachi, and he had indeed suffered a huge blow before. However, when he heard Xu Jing's words, he still felt a little uncomfortable. Coupled with the pressure from everyone's comments, he had no choice but to clarify. It would be best if I can pass this life and death situation today. If I can't, then it's my own incompetence. It has nothing to do with little Hachi. 8th Divine Emissary, please take back what you just said. Xu Jing's expression was very unsightly. However, she didn't feel that she was wrong. Instead, she was even more certain that it was little Hachi's fault. If she didn't have such a foxy face, why would so many people speak up for her? Moreover, the words Brother Yanqing were really ear-piercing. At the same time, the divine envoys near the main hall of the illusory god palace had different expressions when they heard little Hachi's words. It was not for anything else but because of that name. Fan Yunxiao looked at Yu Qian with some uncertainty and said, "Second divine envoy, the person that the woman mentioned just now. It's just the same name," Yu Qian said coldly. "He's also from the divine ruins realm." Fan Yunxiao and the others heaved a sigh of relief. I knew it was impossible, but looking at the time, that person should be here soon, right? Yu Qian looked up. That person will never come at a time like this. He will probably only appear when this matter is over, and everyone ascends to the heavens and becomes a god. The few of them showed expressions of agreement. But why isn't the second master here yet? Fan Yunxiao frowned. According to the rules, he should have arrived before the life and death stage began. Yu Qian disagreed. Perhaps he was delayed by something. But it's a little late now, so the impact isn't too big. He should be here soon. Fan Yunxiao could only keep quiet. A hint of unwillingness flashed across her eyes. If the treasure pavilion had given him the account book earlier, it would have been fine if the second master didn't come. But the other party's attitude was firm, so he could only compromise. Wait. Xu Jing took a deep breath, suppressed the impatience and irritation in his heart, and looked around. At this moment, including little Hachi and the others who arrived first, there were a total of 11 people who were determined to pass the life and death stage in the Celestial Physician competition. Xu Jing said, "The rules for this stage are very simple. There are no restrictions. As long as you can refine a pill that is outstanding enough, you will pass." With that, she waved her hand and summoned a 3-legged bronze cauldron. From the looks of it, she was planning to start refining the pill directly. Sure enough, in the next moment, she slapped her hand on the cauldron, boom. A blue flame burned fiercely in the cauldron. Upon closer inspection, there was a hint of silver in the blue flame. The surrounding temperature rose instantly, and the aura was shocking. Little Hachi narrowed her beautiful eyes and raised the corner of her lips. Then she summoned her own cauldron. Boom! A cluster of dazzling flames burned brightly. Treasure Pavilion. In the room, Yengo was pacing back and forth with his hands behind his back. Cheng looked at him helplessly. "Second master, it's already so late. Why aren't you going?" Yengo stopped in his tracks and looked out the window. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Let's go." Digression. The 5th chapter was slightly later, about 3 o'clock. Then I realized that this book is really about to become a mystery. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 2434. After the Celestial Physician competition started, the blacksmiths and mystic masters entered the venue one after another. The mystic masters naturally sent out Jin and Lai to fight one by one. As for the blacksmiths, unexpectedly, no one came out after a long time. After waiting for a while, the divine envoys looked at each other. The other cultivators were also at a loss. At this moment Mu Qinghe's voice sounded. "The banquet will come later. The competition will continue as usual." Hearing this, many people's expressions changed subtly. Only then did they remember that the 10th divine envoy had not shown up for a long time. Outsiders did not know, but Yu Qian and the others knew that Jiulong was imprisoned in the illusionary god sea. They thought that the first divine envoy would release them in advance, but they did not expect him to wait until now. However, since he said so, he should be here soon. Someone could not help but whisper, "The lightning pool has been sealed. I'm afraid it's not easy to use the Tianlei to refine the divine artifact. What should we do?" This was actually the problem they were most worried about. As soon as they finished speaking, Mu Qinghe waved her sleeve. Several silver lightning bolts flew out rapidly. Then, they all fell into the chaos holy jade. The sunken area in the middle was actually filled with silver heavenly lightning. Streaks of silver snake-like power swam and attacked it. One could even hear crackling sounds coming from it. "This is enough for you to pass the trial of life and death," Mu Qinghe said. Many people were secretly speechless. The first divine envoy was indeed extraordinary. His first move was so shocking. This Tianlei was definitely enough to refine the divine artifact of a venerable. If they wanted to go up, they would have to summon the power of the chaos holy jade. Only then did the blacksmiths relax and start to work. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. Next to the chaos holy jade, the 4 competition areas were engaged in fierce battles. Chu Luiyue looked around, and finally focused on the celestial physician competition. After all, Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi were both there. As the flame burned, Little Hachi placed the herbs in one by one. Her movements were smooth as flowing water. Even Chu Luiyue was stunned. Although she knew that Little Hachi was quite good in this aspect, she had never really seen her concoct pills. Especially after Little Hachi broke through to become a senior doctor, such opportunities became even rarer. Therefore, even she couldn't help but be secretly surprised when she suddenly saw it. Su Li's eyes lit up as she praised him. "Little Yuer, I remember that Little Hachi just broke through to senior medical master not too long ago. How can he be so powerful?" Although she was not a celestial physician, she had seen the Supreme Doctor refine pills many times. Little Hachi's technique could be ranked in the top 3. Chu Luiyue smiled. "She's always been smart, and she's been coming to Herb Mountain recently. No wonder she's like this." Su Li nodded thoughtfully. She lowered her voice and said, "Although I don't really understand, based on the current situation, I actually feel that Little Hachi isn't inferior to the 8th divine envoy." Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes slightly. Actually, this wasn't Su Li's illusion. In fact, she also felt this way. In the celestial physician competition, Xu Jing's own strength was also suppressed to that of a senior medical master. Everyone started to refine pills at the same time. This feeling of contrast was even more intense. Xu Jing's movements were skillful, and so was Little Hachi. Xu Jing had an excellent grasp of propriety, and so did Little Hachi. Xu Jing could adjust the flame according to the characteristics of the herbs he put in at different times. Little Hachi was the same. Compared to the two of them, the remaining celestial physician actually gave birth to a sense of clumsiness. Liang He and Jian Fengqi were slightly better, but the gap between them was still obvious. It seemed that Little Hachi had put in a lot of effort during this period of time. Even the onlookers could see the contrast, let alone those who were in the competition. Xu Jing didn't take Little Hachi seriously at first, but gradually as time passed, she finally realized that Little Hachi's strength was much stronger than she had expected. The distance between her eyes wasn't far, so she could see it when she looked up. Little Hachi stood in front of the medicine cauldron with a smile on her beautiful and charming face. Her every move was filled with an indescribable sense of beauty. That was the smoothness of her understanding of the characteristics of the herbs and flames to the extreme. As she moved, the broken jade beads on her wrist jingled. In the eyes of the crowd, she didn't look like she was refining pills at all. Instead, she looked like she was dancing. Just standing there, she was as beautiful as a painting. Xu Jing frowned. She added a few more herbs and secretly sped up the refining speed. Little Hachi suddenly curled her lips into a smile. Is the 8th divine envoy anxious? However, refining pills wasn't something that could be done in a hurry. This Xu Jing really couldn't keep her composure. I really don't know how she got the position of the 8th divine envoy. Little Hachi thought as she methodically refined the various herbs in the medicine cauldron step by step. Suddenly, a heavy crash came from the side. Bang! Chu Liuyue's eyes turned slightly. It turned out that the competition between Fong Sinning and Mu Dongyu had ended. The muffled sound just now was the sound of Fong Sinning being punched by Mu Dongyu and falling to the ground. He had actually lost. What a pity, Xiao Ran suddenly said with regret in his voice. Immediately after, Chu Luyue saw a few streams of light suddenly fly out from the Xian formation under their feet. Like ropes, they wrapped around Fong Sinning tightly. His body was covered in wounds, and his face and hands were stained with blood. He looked very miserable. When he saw these streams of light, a deep look of despair flashed across his face. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just closed his eyes. In the next moment, his figure was instantly swallowed up. In an instant, his soul was destroyed. Chu Luyue's pupils constricted, and her heart thumped a few times. The venerable god powerhouse, who had an amazing aura just now, had completely fallen in the blink of an eye. He didn't even have the chance to say a word. The so-called life and death juncture was indeed dangerous. She subconsciously looked around, but saw that most people didn't look shocked. Obviously, the moment Fong Sinning was defeated, they had already expected this scene. Chu Luyue held her breath. Although there was a barrier concealing all movements in the competition area, she seemed to smell the faint smell of blood in the air. No wonder everyone was desperately trying to enter the illusory god palace in advance. Who knew how much danger they would face in this round alone? Thinking of this, she frowned and looked at little Hachi and Jian Fengqi. If they also failed, then would they face the same ending as Fong Sinning? Just as this thought flashed across her mind, an explosion suddenly sounded. Bang! Chu Luyue looked over and saw that it was a celestial physician not far behind little Hachi. A mistake caused the failure, and the entire medicine cauldron completely exploded. One of the fragments even flew towards little 8 at high speed. Chu Luyue's heart instantly hung in the air. Chapter 2435. Little Hachi did not even raise her head when she heard the commotion. Instead, she waved her hand lightly. A beam of divine power flew out and instantly turned the rapidly flying fragments into dust. Even the terrifying fluctuations that followed it quickly subsided. Little Hachi did not even have a single strand of hair messed up. She adjusted the dangling hair ornament on her head and threw the remaining medicinal herbs into the cauldron. The flames swept out and instantly engulfed the herbs. A unique smell with a hint of fragrance in the bitterness slowly spread out. Upon seeing this, Chu Luyue's worried heart finally relaxed. It seemed that little Hachi's abilities were much stronger than she had expected. As for the surrounding onlookers, when they saw this scene, their hearts trembled, and they all revealed shocked and astonished expressions. This celestial physician can't be distracted when refining medicine, right? How could she handle it so smoothly and naturally? And she even had the time to look at the dangling hair ornament on her head? I saw it clearly. She didn't even raise her head just now. She just waved her hand lightly. With this kind of ability, I'm afraid that she has already far surpassed an ordinary supreme doctor, right? Definitely. Anyway, if it were me, I definitely wouldn't be able to do better than her in that situation. Little Hachi is beautiful to begin with. I didn't expect her to be so secretive. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Little Hachi's red lips curled up slightly when she heard this. If she did not show some tricks, would these people really think that she was just a flower vase? Jian Fengqi, who wasn't far from her, was currently focused on the cauldron in front of him. In addition, little Eight's hand was coincidentally covered by her own body, so Jian Fengqi couldn't see it. Hence, he actually didn't notice what happened here. However, Liang He, who was on the other side, saw everything clearly. In fact, his mind was not very calm to begin with. The shocking explosion just now had made him fall into a deep trance for a moment. This also allowed him to take in little Hachi's series of actions. He frowned, and a complicated look flashed across his eyes. Little Hachi, she had improved tremendously in such a short time. When he first met her, she was only a senior physician. How long had it been? Not only had he become a senior doctor, he had even, compared to him, he was slightly better. If he had been the one in that situation, he might not have been able to handle it better than little Hachi. The most important thing was that her mentality was too good. In the face of such a crisis, even a celestial physician would be frightened. Even if they could handle it, they would still be worried. However, little Hachi did not seem to care about it at all. It was as if the danger that almost destroyed her pill and caused her to die was not as important as the dangling hair ornament in her hair. After that, she continued to concoct medicine very smoothly. It was obvious that she was not affected in the slightest. If he didn't possess absolute strength, how could he have such guts? Puff! A muffled sound came from in front of him. Liang He came back to his senses in a panic. Only then did he realize that because he was distracted, one of the herbs in his cauldron had failed and turned into a pile of black ash. He panicked and hurriedly tried to remedy it. Fortunately, it was not a big problem and did not affect the overall process. However, this small accident made Liang He's already sensitive state of mind even more fragile. His whole body was tense, and sweat kept appearing on his forehead. It was obvious to the naked eye that he was nervous. Even the movements of his hands appeared to be sluggish and stiff for a moment. Liang He's situation doesn't seem right. Su Li's eyes focused as she said with uncertainty in a low voice. Chu Liyue's lips curled up slightly. Even an outsider like Su Li could see the problem. This proved that Liang He was indeed in a lot of trouble. His mentality has collapsed, she said lightly. She had fought with Liang He before. Although she won that time, she still recognized Liang He's talent and strength. After all, he was the youngest senior doctor in the illusory god palace. However, a celestial doctor's mentality was extremely important when refining medicine. After all, this was an extremely meticulous process. If there was even the slightest mistake in the middle, it was very likely that the whole game would be lost. The previous series of events had obviously caused him a lot of damage, so much so that he was dispirited until today, and hadn't completely adjusted. Now that he saw little Hachi's stunning performance, it was one disaster after another. Su Li thoughtfully nodded her head. Then, little Yue, do you think he can still win this round? Chu Liyue paused for a moment and shook her head. I'm 80% sure he can't. If Liang He was at his peak, his chances of winning would still be very high. But now, then his mental fortitude is really a little weak. Su Li said with some regret. She was completely convinced by Chu Liyue's words. Since she said it couldn't be done, then it definitely couldn't be done. Thinking back, when they had just arrived, everyone in the illusory god palace was full of admiration and envy when they mentioned Liang He. In the blink of an eye, he had become like this, disregarding everything else. Just this point alone was indeed a pity. Xiao Ran suddenly shook her head and sighed, smiling somewhat helplessly. Liang He became famous at a young age, so he's extremely arrogant. It's normal that he couldn't take the blow. He had always been high and mighty, and was highly sought after. Once he fell from the clouds, it was the easiest for him to be unable to recover. Liang He was the most vivid example. On the surface, it seemed that little Hachi had casually resolved a crisis. But in the eyes of the surrounding celestial physician, they would unconsciously compare themselves with her, causing their emotions to fluctuate. Senior Xiao Ran's words are reasonable. Chu Liyue nodded her head in agreement. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said with a faint smile. So, Liang He might not be the only one who had a mental breakdown. As she spoke, her gaze turned slightly and fell on Xu Jing. Xu Jing's mood was indeed very bad. She was a medical sage herself. Even if she was suppressed to the level of a medical sage in this competition zone, she was still able to handle it with ease compared to others. So, everything that happened on the field was actually within her perception. In particular, she was very close to little Hachi. They could see each other as soon as they raised their heads. So the scene just now also fell into her eyes with incomparable clarity. How could this be the reaction of a person who had just broken through to the level of a medical sage less than a year ago? Xu Jing was first shocked, then in disbelief. In the end, her chaotic emotions intertwined and gradually made her angry. A lowly person who she didn't even take seriously actually had such strength? If she was given more time, it might not be impossible for her to break through the level of a medical sage. Thinking of this, Xu Jing felt even more annoyed. At this moment, little Hachi had finished refining the last medicinal herb. She slapped her palm on the medicinal cauldron, and the flames within instantly burned even more fiercely. Condense! With a delicate shout, the countless medicinal herbs in the medicinal cauldron began to fuse together. Everyone was shocked. Little Hachi actually started to refine pills before Xu Jing. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.